Call this meeting of the Madison Plan Commission of March 13th, 2023 to order. First, we will hear from our technical facilitator.
All right, welcome to our virtual Plan Commission meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking on the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which their hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. I don't believe there is any public comment. So we will move on to communications, disclosures, and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Are there any disclosures or recusals? Seeing no raised hands, we will go to the minutes of the February 27th regular meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing no raised hands for additions or corrections, do we have a motion to approve? Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepard. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Our schedule of upcoming meetings include regular meetings on April 10th, April 24th, May 8th, and May 22nd, 2023. Next is our consent agenda. It's a custom of the Plan Commission to remove from the agenda those items on which the staff believes an application has had sufficient review to warrant approval with all of the conditions placed upon it by various city departments, on which the applicant accepts those conditions and there are no individuals who are registered to speak. These items are addressed at the beginning of our meeting. People interested in those items can then disconnect. Unless a Plan Commission member requests separation, in which case the items removed from the consent agenda and taken in the regular course of business. Tonight, we have item 2 on the consent agenda and then item 5 for referral. Are there any commissioners who would like to request separation? Seeing no raised hands, I will read those into the record. So it's agenda item 2, Legistar 76507, determining a public purpose and necessity and adopting transportation project plat number 12777-1-4.08, Amendment 1. And then for referral, agenda item 5, and this is being referred to March 27th at the request of the petitioner, and it is Legistar 75151. Do we have a motion on the consent agenda? Moved by Commissioner Cantrell, Is there a second? Seconded by Alder Paulson. And I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the consent agenda passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda under new business is agenda item 3, Legistar 76399, adopting the Hawthorne Truax Neighborhood Plan as a supplement to the City of Madison Comprehensive Plan. And we will hear, I see that Commissioner Fernandez has a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chair. Thank you. Just a procedural question. The schedule of meetings has April 10, 24, and May 8th. There is a March 27th meeting, correct?
A March 27th. Yes, there would be. And that's not on the. Yes, there is.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I thought there was, and I just wanted.
Yeah. Okay, so back to agenda item 3, and we're going to hear first from staff member Dan McAuliffe. Dan, go ahead.
Thanks. All right, thank you. Let me share really quick. Hopefully I'll be relatively brief tonight, but again, my name is Dan McAuliffe. I'm one of the project leads on the Hawthorne Truax Neighborhood Plan. So you've probably seen this before, but the plan area we're generally focusing on is really centered on East Washington and Highway 51, kind of bordered by the airport, Highway 30, and Mendota and Rindall Avenue. The plan is to update the 20-year-old neighborhood plan, which name escapes me because it's very long. Hawthorne, Truax, Sycamore, Mayfair. It's really, really long. But obviously a lot's changed in the past 20 years, and we're trying to make sure that the plan reflects the current realities that we are facing as a city. As I mentioned, we are at the very end of this process in the adoption phase after going through 3 phases of public engagement. First, centered on defining those issues, opportunities. Second, review of concepts and a recommendation framework. And our third, which was reviewing the draft document and discussion about some implementation projects funded by Community Development Block Grant dollars. We have done a lot of engagement during this process. And a lot of the common themes we heard were centered around housing and the need for more housing growth, both in terms of affordable as well as market rate. Placemaking. There's really no definable, core or area that people identify as the center of their neighborhood. There's a lot of excitement about redevelopment in the neighborhood. There's also a big series of comments about improving community services in the area to make sure the neighborhood continues to thrive. So this is the land use recommendations that are in the draft. Very similar from what you saw previously when we were back in September, with the themes really of a higher intensity at BRT station, the incorporation of missing middle housing into the residential area, and a shift from commercial to mixed use to allow for more residential in appropriate locations. A couple areas that have really changed. I'm going to use my highlighter just a little bit. The area north of Ansgar, that change was recommended from commercial to employment to really reflect the current situation is there. It's predominantly employment. It seems to be a very good land use. And if there are neighborhoods serving commercial uses, it seems we like those closer to where residences are. And on the southern frontage of Highway 51, changing from a commercial to kind of an employment and residential mix, with employment facing Highway 51. It's kind of a frontage road that is kind of separated from the residential core of that neighborhood. Though that's the extent of the land use changes that we are recommending since we were here last time. In addition, there is some recommendations for a couple proactive rezonings that would occur as a separate process, or that could occur as a separate process after the adoption. We did highlight a couple of areas. We took a little bit of a different approach in this one, particularly since we knew that both the alders who are in office now will not be in office in April after the election. So we kind of took a little bit of a different approach where we have clear policy guidance on and precedent for those rezonings that we've seen in the past, and then some that have some unanswered questions that merit additional discussion. Our initial thought is we would have those discussions as part of that follow-up process. But to start, the first one would be a change of the zoning from CC to IL to reflect that employment land use. And the other site that we are recommending is a change from TE to CCT to better align with the mixed use land use designation there. A couple other spots, those ones that are the dashed or have some questions, we want to make sure that we have a more robust discussion and a follow-up process. So also new is the community development block grant funded projects. We have divided these into a couple tiers. Tier 1, which we just feel a little bit more straightforward of a process, and our second one, Tier 2, which has some unanswered questions that we'll be working to address in the coming months. We heard a big need for youth recreation facilities, particularly a basketball court in the vicinity of the Truax apartments. One of the interesting things that came about through this planning process, we realized we have funds to make a lot of these improvements, but we really don't have the land. Hawthorne or Carpenter Ridgeway Park is actually on airport property, and much of the open space to the north is actually not the city's. So we will be working to see if there's some see if there's a way that we can work with Dane County and the airport to see those desires come to fruition. There's also a lot of placemaking and public art and lighting projects, particularly under the tunnels, both at East Washington and under the Marshview Path. One idea was kind of combining some of the public art with a light illumination sculpture or art piece that could provide illumination so users feel safe and comfortable while using those facilities, but also create some interest in terms of placemaking. As I mentioned, we are at the end of the approval process. We've had a relatively quick review process. And all the boards, commissions, and committees that we've mentioned or have seen thus far have recommended approval with no amendments. And we are here before Plan Commission today. That is all I really have for today. Happy to answer questions from commissioners.
Thank you, Dan. So I will turn to commissioners. Do you have any questions? Why don't you get rid of the screen share, Dan?
Yeah, hold on a second.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Are there questions of Dan or other staff in regard to the plan? And Linda Horvath is here also if there are questions. Yes, Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I have a quick question on the potential proactive rezonings. Is it in that exhibit, the current zoning, it's in the red text and the change would be in the black text? Is that, I feel like I'm remembering from past maps.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So where the CCT is there by Highway 30, would just that parcel be CCT and the rest along 30 would remain TE, or would you be looking to do that whole section?
Let me pull up the document really quick. I'll share that particular page. That might help with the conversation here really quick. Hold on 1 second. Actually. All right, so our recommendation up in the IL district would be to recommend change from CC in the solid dash line to IL. When we transition down, that's where the break is between CC and CCT. That's one of those areas I think that merits further discussion, as well as on those other frontages. But this one is just from CC to IL.
Okay. And then the other one south of that where it's CCT. Yes, right there.
Yep.
So would just that parcel that's outlined be changed to CCT and the rest would say TE?
Yes,
There?
that's
Okay.
correct. So that is kind of the transition where we make that land use transition from employment to mixed use. And we just wanted to try to facilitate, if we are envisioning a redevelopment or allowing a redevelopment to occur, we want to try to simplify the zoning and just keeping consistency to make sense in that location.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Solheim. Any other questions of staff? Commissioner Cantrell.
Just one quick question is, are commercial uses allowable in the IL district?
Yes, there's a series of commercial uses that are allowable. And when we took a look to see if we would be creating any nonconformities, nothing immediately jumped out at us. In that area, there was a former FedEx facility. There's an Eagles Club. There's a couple of these DMV, which is predominantly an office.
Right.
It really does fall into that employment category more so than commercial.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, looking for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
Hey, I need to unmute myself.
You're unmuted.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to recommend that the Plan Commission adopt the Hawthorne Truax Neighborhood Plan as a supplement to the city's Madison's comprehensive plan.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Alder Paulson. Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak to your motion?
Just briefly, this plan really hasn't changed much since we've reviewed it at our study session on this item. The changes that you're proposing look appropriate, and I think it was well prepared, and look forward to its implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments before we come to a vote? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. And thanks to staff for all your work on this plan. Good job.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda, agenda item 4 under zoning text amendment, Legistar 75678, amending subsections A and B of supplemental regulations related to keeping of chickens within section 28.151 of the Madison General Ordinances to increase the number of chickens allowed as an accessory use. And we're going to first hear from Katie Bannon. Katie.
Thank you. Just wanted to give a little bit of a summary of the proposal here today. So we added into our zoning code in about 2004 that the keeping of chickens would be allowed, with some supplemental regulations about location of enclosure, having to be 25 feet from adjacent residential structures, and a limit of 4 chickens. At a later time, from requests we received, we added that schools, museums, and community centers could also keep chickens. Otherwise, the limit of 4 is for properties with up to 4 dwelling units on a property. The intent with the number 4 at the time was, the thought was that would be enough eggs for a typical household. It's really about eggs for the household, not eggs commercially or eggs to give out necessarily. And so that was why that number was selected. As far as the supplemental regulations, a lot of it was just about mitigating impacts, recognizing, yes, we wanted to allow chickens to be able to be raised for eggs, but also that there could be impacts on neighbors potentially. And so trying to kind of balance both interests. And we believe we were probably one of the first urban communities that did allow keeping of chickens in this way. When we look at the complaints we receive, vast majority of them are about roosters. We do occasionally get some complaints today about the number of chickens and have required reductions of flocks in some cases. Most of the time it's about roosters. As I mentioned in the staff report, there are times we will see 5 or 6 chickens if the complaint is not about the number. We just address the rooster complaint. That's usually what the complaint is about. As far as staff's position on this, we think adding a few additional chickens, our recommendation was 6, makes sense. We don't think that that would have too big of negative impacts. However, we did have some concerns about going up to the number 10, that the impacts could be enough that it might not be the right number. So that's just it as far as providing kind of background on this proposal. I did also want to mention that, I guess I should look here to make sure, but I believe we have John Hausbeck and Shannon Meyer from Public Health here as well. They respond to some of the complaints we receive about chickens, so they can answer what they do from a public health perspective if there's any questions along those lines. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Katie. First, we will have the public hearing and then come back for questions. So I will open the public hearing. The first registrant is Julie Banghart. Caldy, Wisconsin, in support and wishing to speak. Julie, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. This is Mark Banghart, Julie's husband.
Hello, and Julie's here too.
Yeah. The issue we have with the limit of 4, and we do have the 4 chickens, is that as they age, they stop laying eggs. And they become pets. They become very dear to us, not just us, but the neighbors. The kids come over and spend time with them and play. And we just don't want to have to lose them or make the decision to lose the eggs. So having it be some way where we can both have, chickens that are laying, but not have to give up the chickens we have is really just a wonderful solution for us. And this would be a dream for us not to have to let these girls go, and yet be able to bring some new ones in that can start laying as they stop.
And we would support the 10 chickens because it does take a number of chickens to have eggs for a family of 4, and feel that there's really no big difference of noise in your neighborhood from 6 to 10 chickens. So we support changing to 10.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both. The next registrant is Matt Heinzel, Green Avenue, Madison, Wisconsin, in support and wishing to speak. You have 3 minutes.
Hello. I'm assuming you can hear me. I have unmuted, but
Okay, now we can hear you.
thank you very much. Yes, I am speaking in support of the increasing the number to 10. I have had chickens for quite a few years, actually, probably since the ordinance was the conditional use was first allowed, and I'd say that 4 is maybe enough for a family to have eggs, depending on the breed. And different breeds have different number of eggs that they produce in a day, or maybe not. And sometimes you get none for a day with 4. The other thing is that chickens are social animals, and 4 is not really a flock for them. They have trouble, or they just don't seem as happy as when there are more of them around. never really had problems with my neighbors. I did end up having roosters one time. It was an accident. Well, got chicks and they weren't sexed, so that was a problem. I have a very large yard, and four of them kind of get lost in the yard too, since it's all fenced in. I would also agree that don't want to have to farm off or give to somebody to butcher or something the chickens as they age and no longer. I think that's a very good point as well. So that's my bit.
Okay, thank you very much. The next registrant is Philosophy Walker, Tolman Terrace, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hello. My name is Philosophy Walker. I'm a resident of the Orchard Ridge neighborhood here in Madison, and I am speaking in support of increasing the number of chickens allowed on a property to 10. So for the following reasons. One, chicken keeping is really hard for people to get involved in with a 4 chicken maximum, because almost every reputable place where you would purchase chicks, like a local hatchery or a farm supply store like Blaine's, requires a minimum order of 5 to make sure that the chickens reach their destination alive and that they have enough warmth. So every spring, the minimum results in some people needing to find a new home for their 5th chick, or even just blatantly breaking the law when they can't find someone to take the extra baby. I see it all the time on my chicken groups. As previously mentioned, chickens lay eggs for 3 to 4 years, but they live for an average of 7. So as a result, most flock keepers like me start out with 4 chickens so we can maximize egg production, but then we end up in a situation where our chickens aren't laying anymore. And so either, as previously mentioned, you have to give them away or process the chickens, kill them, to get new chickens that have eggs, or you have to just put up with not having eggs for 3 years. And that is another reason I support the limit of 10, because that way it would make it easy for people to get 5 chickens, wait 4 years, get 5 chickens, and then that makes it into a nice cycle, a nice reproductive cycle. And lastly, chicken keeping is an economical and easy way to supplement your family's food budget, but it doesn't just help my family. The more chickens that my family keeps and the other people speaking in support, the more extra eggs we have and the more eggs we will give away to nearby neighbors. I give dozens of eggs every year to food pantries. I give dozens of eggs away for free. I don't sell them. I give them away to my neighbors throughout the year, which is why they are big fans of me having chickens. The average price of a dozen eggs in the United States is $4.80 right now. And so increasing local egg production decreases demand for corporate egg supplies, and that can ease prices even just a little tiny bit around here in Madison. So thank you for your time. I really urge you to support this change. And as I said before, I do urge you to raise the limit to 10 chickens. Thanks.
Thank you, Philosophy. The next registrant is Olivia Williams, Anchor Drive, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. Olivia, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, thank you. I want to urge you to support a change to 10 chickens. I've kept chickens in the past. I have a lot of friends and neighbors who keep chickens in the city, and at least some of them are out of compliance for having more than 4 chickens for a lot of the reasons people have brought up. It kind of makes sense to have more than 4 chickens. And if you have more than 4, you wouldn't go register your chickens with the city because you'd be out of compliance. So if this ordinance were changed, it would help actually bring more people into compliance and give more reason to register your chickens and contribute fees to the city of Madison. And I also want to point out that the number of chickens that's currently allowed at 4 is about how many chickens I would need to feed me as just one person. I eat 2 eggs every morning, plus I use eggs and other baked goods and dishes pretty regularly. I'm vegetarian, and so they're my primary source of protein and fat. And the average backyard hen at the height of productivity lays about 200 eggs a year. So I would need 4 egg-producing hens just for me to produce the number of eggs that I eat. So if I'm sharing my home with more than, one other person or multiple people, we need more hens just to produce enough eggs for everyone in the house. Other people have brought up how hens only produce for a few years, and if you want to keep your hens, you would need kind of more. And most people do like to keep their older hens alive because chickens make great pets. They're really fun. They have unique personalities. I really love them. They can be friendly and sweet, and they're great entertainment for kids. Unlike dogs, they don't bark or bite. And there's not actually a limit on dogs people can keep in the city and the number of dogs. They don't take up a lot of space. They actually kind of pile on top of each other in the coop, even when there's a lot of room. And they like having protected backyard space, but 10 chickens don't take up more space overall than 4. And if you already have a pen and a flock, the upkeep of a chicken pen for 10 is not really much more work than 4. So if you're going to be doing the work to keep chickens, you want to have enough to produce eggs for a household. And this is also important when we think about potential food supply shocks in the coming decades and just building resilience in our city. It's just a common sense way to increase food security for Madison residents. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Olivia. The next registrant is Serena Wolf, Melrose Street, Madison, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Are there questions of any of our registrants? Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, I have a question for at least one of the speakers. I don't know which one wants to respond. How big is your pen? You're for, or if you would have 10, how big would a pen be? And I guess and of the speakers, I'm assuming, are their lots large, or backyards large? Or are they in the inner city where you have very small backyard? So that's my question. Does the size of a yard make any big difference to keeping a 4 versus 10 chickens?
Just at random, let's pick Philosophy Walker to answer that. Could you please answer that, Philosophy?
Sure. So I currently have 4, and the size of my pen, it's maybe the size of a small shed. It would not change if I had 10 chickens, because actually all it would do is help my chickens stay warmer in the winter. The more chickens, as someone, I think it was Olivia previously mentioned, chickens don't really spread out. They all pile on top of each other. So there would be no change to the amount of space I would need. I live in the city of Madison, and I have almost half an acre of backyard. It's fenced in. So the space considerations, really, chickens are pretty economical in terms of space, at least in my experience.
So would you say you wouldn't have to have a big backyard? Most properties in Madison are as big as yours. I would say you wouldn't need a huge backyard, especially chickens. I love them, but they're not like super adventurous. They like to stick together, and they like to sort of hang out together. And so if you had really, I would say, any amount of backyard where, say, you could keep a dog, you could keep a chicken, or 10 chickens. Okay. Thank you, Philosophy.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Are there any other questions? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Cantrell.
Staff said they were a little concerned about 10. And I guess I would like for staff, after hearing the testimony we had, is it the size of the yard? Is it? It doesn't sound like the chickens are a big problem, and they don't make a lot of noise. Is it the sanitary issues, or could staff really respond to the question?
Matt?
I'll start. And Katie, if you want to add anything, feel free. Or John Housebeck, if you want to kind of touch on what you guys and your people have found. So this is this is one of those matters of kind of balancing the usage of property between neighbors. Chickens, at least the way that we have seen them in the years that I've been here and my staff's been inspecting, they follow up on complaints and they look at installations and things like that and looking for distance and separation. And you don't need a lot of area in order to have an appropriately sized coop or call it like a free range area for them to walk around. It just has to be sized accordingly so it's safe and it's sanitary. It's provides some protection from the elements, and otherwise is gonna provide or result in minimal adverse impact on the neighbors. It's kind of what it comes down to. And so these sort of lines in the sand have been drawn about where they are and also how many, the number. The impact of the birds varies. Birds that are well taken care of by people who are conscientious, which is probably most people, are probably not a huge problem. We're not hearing from anyone today that is opposed to it because, well, for obvious reasons, that's how these things always go. You always hear about people that are more supportive of changes than people that are not. But so we often represent when we're explaining like what we've seen and what we've heard. And really what happens is a policy kind of changes, and it changes from a chicken egg policy to something different when you have a number as high as is being proposed. And I'll tell you exactly what I told the alder when he approached me about this a month and a half ago. He was asking me what the number might be, and I talked to my staff and I asked them, and they said, when they go to look at cases, it's pretty normal what they kind of see. It's usually not the location or the number of birds there. It's usually a rooster, something. Maybe it's if they're not in an enclosure, but that's sort of a separate matter. But their response to us back was, a few more birds is something you probably wouldn't notice because they do pile on each other and they kind of sleep and stay close to each other, or they kind of congregate into a tight area together. The 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever they might see when they're there to look at something. But when you get to numbers like 10, what they said to me is, you wonder what's up. There's something else going on here when you have somebody that has 10 or more chickens at their property. There tends to be other issues that are going on above and beyond the typical conventional chicken keeping, which is why when we looked at this, we were recognizing that I think naturally the level is probably settled out at about 6. A 10 is 2.5 times the current number. It might be a bridge too far if you're trying to balance the interests of property owners that would like to keep chickens and those that are living next door that may not want to live next door to chickens.
Do you aggressively prosecute people if they have 6 currently 6 chickens or 8 chickens, or you just say? I guess it depends on the complaint and what the complaint is, but and you may not want to answer that question.
I'll answer it. I'm good. It's funny, isn't it? This is a funny topic. The majority of the complaints we get are for roosters, and we do aggressively push to relocate roosters because they totally impact the quality of life of people in the city.
Sure.
It's very rare that we will get a complaint about 6 roosters as a standalone matter. There's usually something else going on the property or some other conflict between neighbors. You've heard us in the past talk about people having ordinance power over others because they know, that's a bad deal. But we have had some instances where we've had more than 10 birds and we've had to go in and reduce the number. Have we prosecuted? No. I mean, the worst I've seen has been a municipal citation for a rooster. But normally what we're doing is providing a notice of violation. Usually when we're running into something like someone that has 10, we might find out that they also don't have a license with the city. So we're kind of doubling up on that, saying you got to get the license with the city. And the matter does work its way to compliance and we close our case and move on to more important things.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is that all your questions, Commissioner?
I think that hit everything.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions of staff? And again, we do have John House back here from Public Health. Okay, Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I'll just ask Public Health while they're here. Are there any concerns about any additional exposure to poultry? Is this enough of a number that we would care about from a bird flu perspective or anything?
Quite honestly, bird flu is something that's already in our community, and flocks can be impacted. So it's not. I don't think that necessarily increasing the number is going to change the impact of bird flu. It'll just increase the number of birds that end up getting culled if there's an infection event. And that would be an unfortunate thing. On the health side of things, we deal with complaints in 3 typical areas. One is running at large. Chickens, I imagine, are quite capable of finding the gaps in people's enclosures or fences and whatnot. And we do run into probably half a dozen or maybe 10 at the most complaints over the last 4 or 5 years with chickens running at large. The other issue is welfare, which thankfully is a relatively uncommon thing. As we heard from the registrants tonight, most chicken owners are very conscientious and they have chickens because they care about their chickens. A big part of the ordinances, yes, people like to have eggs, and having a home production of eggs is a great thing, but these animals are more like pets than they are livestock, right? And I think that once we start moving down the road of making things more like agriculture or livestock than about this being a household animal, such as a dog, cat, or whatnot, that's when I think that we're going to start seeing a little bit more conflict between neighbors. Like Matt had said, the use in urban properties is important. The third thing that we see is on the sanitation side of things. And, chickens is, aside from dogs and sometimes cats, dogs for the most part are fed indoors. Most cats are as well. We do have issues with feral cats and people having outdoor cats and the problems associated with that. But chickens are, pretty much 100% outdoor animals, fed outdoors. The feed becomes an attractive source of nutrients for other critters in the neighborhood, specifically mice and rats. And that becomes an issue that has to be dealt with further. So again, the conscientious chicken owner is building their coops and their pens such that their feed is controlled and they're making sure that there's not a whole lot of waste for other critters to use. But there are the minority of chicken owners that are less careful, and problems can result.
Thank you, John. Did you have any further questions, Alder Paulson?
I have a question for either Matt or Katie.
Go ahead.
And actually, I'll just hold off till debate on this one. So
not a question?
Not a question right now. No.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions of staff? Seeing no raised hands, I'd be looking for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, I'm going to recommend that the Plan Commission forward Madison General forward this amendment to the City Council with a recommendation of approval, and limiting the number of chickens on the property to 6 as recommended by staff.
Is there a second? Seconded by Alder Paulson. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Cantrell?
Yes, I might be one of the few people on the commission that when I was raised, we had chickens, and we had pet chickens. We had a red one and a black one, and they were great pets, and they produced great eggs. And but that was in a rural area. I think increasing the number makes sense, but I have to agree with staff. I think that that having 6 seems right. And let's see how that goes. Maybe in a few years, if things, if we think that increasing that number is appropriate, maybe we can do that. But in an urban area, we have to kind of look out for everyone. And I think that this is something that progressive. And city Madison's always on the cutting edge, and I think that this seems appropriate. And I guess that's why I'm recommending, at least at this point, 6 chickens seems right. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Is there other thoughts, discussion? Alder Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. And appreciate the recommendation to allow an increase. I would like to urge Commissioners to consider the proposal as put forward to raise it to 10. I think, essentially it sort of boils down to 2 things. What are the additional negative consequences of increasing the limit to 10 versus 6? And what's the difference in terms of benefits for chicken keepers raising it from 6 to 10? I think in all reality, and I could ask more questions of staff, but I got the data both from building inspection as well as public health about the complaints that have happened to date. And as you heard here, almost exclusively those complaints are around roosters and are around chickens getting out. Well, you can make a case that if you allow up to 10 instead of up to 6, there will be more chickens and more possibilities for roosters or more possibilities for chickens getting out. But if chickens are getting out, it's because the enclosure has a problem, not because there happens to be 8 or 9 or 10 or 6 or 4. And as you heard already today, there are very few complaints around noise other than those attributed to roosters. Sanitary conditions, any of these other things that could possibly be negatives of keeping of chickens. On the flip side, raising it from 4 up to 6 gives a little bit of breathing room, but as you heard pretty clearly from a lot of the registrants, those with experience keeping chickens know that as hens get older and become unproductive, if you're not willing to get rid of them, to bring in some new layers, you're going to have a very reduced laying flock pretty shortly. So giving that extra breathing room up to 6 provides perhaps a little bit of relief, but raising it up to 10, I think really gives folks the opportunity to try and manage a appropriately sized and small sized flock for an urban setting. Right now, we have a number of ordinances on the books that really provide all the control we need for any potential negative impact. Chapter 7 in Public Health, 7.29 relating to keeping of fowl within the city of Madison gives public health extraordinary discretion to act on any unsanitary condition or nuisance, really broadly framed. There are provisions in 7.37 around rat eradication that speaks to the issue that you heard about leaving food out. And Chapter 24, offenses against peace and quiet, prohibits any animal or bird which habitually makes noise to disturb the peace and quiet of anybody in the vicinity thereof. So, already all of the potential negative impacts of keeping of chickens have ordinances outside the zoning code to address any of those issues. And so I really think, in terms of the zoning code and the nature of this accessory use to a residential use, whether it's 4 or 6 or 10, it is the same thing. We're not talking about commercial operations here. We're not talking about anything other than a property having a small flock, really for personal use. So would really encourage you all to consider recommending with the limit up to 10, as I think this would do the most benefit for those in the community that are wanting to keep chickens and should really result in no additional issues for those not keeping chickens. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I'd like to offer an amendment to the motion, and that would be upping it to 8 chickens allowable rather than 6.
Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Commissioner Fernandez. Alder Heck, did you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. Thanks. Honestly, I'm just looking at this as a compromise between the two sides in hopes of moving this forward and not having to repeat the discussion at council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further input before we come to a vote on the amendment? Alder Paulson.
My only other idea, and as you know me, I never resist the chance to complicate something. But if we had starting with 6, but actually maybe looking at allowing 10 on other parts of the city just to do an experiment for 3 years to see something like this. Maybe it's just easier to do 8 and see where it goes. But where we do have a nice opportunity, something that's relatively straightforward to do a experiment with. It was something I was going to maybe keep in mind. So, but I'm fine going with 8.
Okay, thank you. Anything else before we come to a vote? Seeing no raised hands, we're voting on the amendment to make it 8 rather than 6. And I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, it's now 8, and we're back to the main motion as amended. Any further discussion or input? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote on the amended ordinance. And I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, now we are moving on to agenda items 6, 7, 8, and 9. And we do have a bit of a complicating issue that has been raised. There is a serious question as to whether the property had the yellow sign put up at all. And as you know, that's something that is supposed to be done for these kinds of proposals. So as a result, we do have 3 possibilities. We can go ahead and have the hearing and act on this tonight. It would be legal and we could do that. Second possibility is to go ahead and have the hearing and then recess and come back to the proposal in 2 weeks, at which time we could hear from anybody who had not spoken tonight and then act on it in 2 weeks. And the third possibility is to refer and not take testimony tonight and act on the whole thing next in 2 weeks. Now, I mean, obviously that there's a disadvantage. I mean, there's people who've registered who are here, but it is a decision that we want to make before we proceed. Alder Heck.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize profusely, but could you repeat the first option again?
The first option would be going ahead and having the hearing and acting, just despite the fact that it appears that there was not that posting. Just proceed as we normally would.
Thank you.
Okay. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, do all three of the items need that notice? So that we've got the demo
Yeah,
on
I
conditional
see
use in
Tim
CSM.
Parks. He's saying yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if we're in quasi debate about this. I would certainly like to be able to give anyone who's here tonight the opportunity to speak. So I would not be in favor of number 3, but.
Okay. So have the hearing, and we could decide after the hearing whether to move for recess or go ahead and act. Commissioner Fernandez.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I guess I am going to speak in favor of alternative 3, with all respect, of course, to difference of opinions. But it seems like alternative 1 might put us in the position of having to hear it again with even more complication, because someone could say, well, I didn't even have a chance to be heard because the notice wasn't there, I didn't register. I may be wrong, but if it seems to me that opens up the possibility that somebody challenges the whole process, and that's not good. That'll slow things down.
I would ask Tim Parks to please read the portion of the ordinance that would likely not make that concern too much of an issue. Tim, could you?
Okay, I'll just very briefly say, and as far as 2 and 3, I would rather hear all the testimony at one time. So that's why I'm going for 3.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Fernandez. Mm-hmm. Tim, could you just read the thing that gives us the ability to go ahead and hear and act?
Sure. This is from Table 28 L-2 in Section 28.185. I'm sorry, 181, Parent 5 of the Zoning Code, which is the notice requirement section for the questions that come before the Plan Commission. So in this case, the rezoning, demolition, and conditional use would all be subject to this. And the relevant section states, and I quote, obtain the sign, public hearing sign, from the Department of Planning and Community and Economic Development for the property that is the subject of the application. The sign must list the times and locations of all public hearings to consider the application. The sign shall be posted at least 21 days prior to the public hearing and shall be located in a position on the property so that it can be read from the sidewalk or other public right-of-way. If a property abuts more than one public right-of-way, a sign shall be placed facing each public right-of-way. The sign shall be removed within 7 days of the last hearing noted. And this is with emphasis, failure to post the sign shall not invalidate any action taken on the application by the Plan Commission and or Common Council. In this case, it also applies to the Zoning Board of Appeals. I just mentioned that for reference, but there's nothing with this project that is pending before the Zoning Board of Appeals. But again, failure to post the sign shall not invalidate any action taken on the application. That's the matter of emphasis.
Thank you, Tim. Alder Heck.
Thank you. After hearing all that, I will weigh in favor of option 1. I also believe that if the sign wasn't posted in this particular circumstance, it would make no difference at all in the number of neighbors who were informed or not informed of this project. It's been in the media extensively. It's been on all the neighborhood listservs. I used to represent this area, so I'm very familiar with it. And I believe that anyone who has an interest is very aware of the project. So I'm comfortable moving forward with option 1.
Thank you. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. So I guess, I understood, Tim. I'd like to ask you, partly a matter of opinion, though. Okay, so it shall not invalidate, and that's pretty clear. If the thing has to go to court, this is not going to invalidate. But at the same time, this is a pretty controversial demolition. If people were to object to this, would they then create an issue at Common Council? I mean, even though it's not going to invalidate the action, I still see opponents of this taking advantage of this lack of notice to create, to make the process lengthened. Would you say that if people came forward with that staff would be comfortable simply saying, sorry, we're going to proceed with this? Or would staff feel in some ways required to say, okay, we will hear this at the next meeting? That's I don't want to take this to court.
It looks like Heather has something to say. Heather?
Thank you, Chair. It's a great question, Commissioner Fernandez. I think we're letting the commission know today that it's unclear whether or not the sign was posted. The applicant team, many of them believe that it was posted. They went through a lot of steps to meet all of the requirements in our ordinance, but they can't confirm, which day it was picked up and posted at this time. And this came to our attention very late in the day today. It's possible that the sign was obtained, posted, and blew away or was removed from the site. So I want to be clear that we don't know for a fact that it was never obtained and posted. In fact, the applicant team thinks that it was, but we want to make sure that this is transparent on the public record, that it's not, we're not able to confirm that sign has been on the property for 21 days, and the ordinance does allow the Plan Commission to still act. I think that some of the points made by Alder Heck are of interest, and commissioners will probably need to weigh just the sense of the public knowledge of this proposal as well.
Thank you, Heather. Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, I agree with Commissioner Heck. This project's been around for a while. It's been reviewed by Urban Design, Landmarks, in the newspapers. I think that the neighbors know what's going on, and they, I'm sure that we'll hear many tonight. And also, I think that I'd prefer to hear all the testimony at one time rather than having it separated in two meetings. That's very complex. And I certainly don't agree with separating the testimony. But I would prefer to go ahead and review it tonight and act on it tonight if we're prepared to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I'll just chime in that I am in favor of option 1 as well for many of the reasons already stated.
Okay, thank you. I am taking it that the general consensus is to go ahead with the public hearing and take action tonight. Obviously, at the end of this, there could be a motion still to recess, but it seems that the sentiment is to have the public hearing and then move to take action tonight. Okay. With that, I will read each of these into the record, and I want to emphasize that they all four are considered to be one public hearing, so people would have the opportunity to speak once to all four of these, since all four are related. Following the public hearing, the Plan Commission shall make separate findings and motions on each agenda item. The first agenda item 6, Legistar 75711, located at 1617 Sherman Avenue, 12th Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a 2-story office building. Agenda item 7, Legistar 76309, creating sections of the Madison General Ordinance to change the zoning of property located at 1601 through 1617 Sherman Avenue, 12th Alder District, from Suburban Employment District to Traditional Residential Urban 2 District. Agenda item 8, Legistar 75712, 1601 through 1617 Sherman Avenue, 12th Alder District. Consideration of a conditional use in the proposed Traditional Residential Urban 2 District for multifamily dwelling containing more than 60 units. Consideration of a conditional use in the same district for a residential building complex containing approximately 310 apartments in 2 5-story buildings. Consideration of a conditional use in the same district for a single-family attached dwelling with greater than 8 units, and consideration of a conditional use in this district for a residential building complex containing 20 townhouse units in 3 2-story buildings. Agenda item 9, Legistar 75713, approving a certified survey map of property owned by Tenney Place Development, LLC, located at 1601 through 1617 Sherman Avenue, 12th Alder District. First, we will hear from staff member Tim Parks. Tim.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. The 4 items before you involve an approximately 8.2 acre parcel located on the easterly side of Sherman Avenue, just across the Yahara River, and also adjacent to Tenney Park. The applicant is seeking approvals to demolish the 2-story, roughly 47,000 square foot former Filene House office building that's also been home to WPS, CUNA, Sony, and more recently CARE Wisconsin, to allow redevelopment of the property with 5 buildings. 3 of the buildings will be 2-story townhouse buildings for a total of 20 units, and the remaining 311 units will be located in 2 5-story apartment buildings. As part of the development, the applicant is seeking to create 3 lots and will dedicate a new 66-foot wide east-west public street that will extend initially from Sherman Avenue across the site to the eastern property line, with plans for that street to eventually extend further to the east to Fordham Avenue to create a through block connection that will parallel the Yahara River. The project before you is subject to the standards for approval for demolition permits for the building at 1617 Sherman Avenue. The standards for approval of zoning map amendment to rezone the site from suburban employment to TRU2 residential. Conditional uses for 2 residential building complexes. The 2 5-story multifamily buildings are 1 complex, and then the 3 townhouse buildings are a separate residential building complex. And then the actual residential unit types themselves, single family attached for the townhouses, and more than 60 dwelling units in a multifamily dwelling, are all requiring conditional use approval. The certified survey map also reviewed by the Plan Commission and forwarded to the Common Council for final approval. So in considering the project, the Plan Commission should give particular consideration to the recommendation of the Landmarks Commission related to the demolition of the former Filene House building at 1617. On 2 occasions, the Plan Commission has reviewed the office building, the first providing their informal recommendation on the demolition of the building in November. As noted in the staff report, the Landmarks Commission forwarded to the Plan Commission its strongest recommendation that the building not be demolished for the reasons that are noted in the report, having mostly to do with the history of the credit union movement that many trace to the building and its time as headquarters for Credit Union National Association and Edward Filene. Subsequent to the informal action on the demolition, and that's the same action that you see every time you review a demolition permit, There was a nomination filed to make the Filing House a City of Madison landmark. That was reviewed by the Landmarks Commission in January of this year, and they found on a 4-2 vote that the standards for designating a landmark could be found, and they recommended to the Common Council, who has the final say on such matters, that the Common Council designate the Filing House as a landmark. However, about a month ago, we're in March now, not February. On February 7th, the Common Council, on a 14-5 vote, did not accept the Landmarks Commission nomination and placed that instead on file without prejudice. However, we're talking about a recommendation that the building not be demolished, and then furthering that by saying that it indeed should be made a landmark. And so the Plan Commission should give careful consideration when reviewing the demolition, considering the significant recommendations and actions of the Landmarks Commission. Otherwise, looking at the project, staff believes on balance that it is largely consistent with adopted plans. A number of plans make recommendations for the site. Of note, 2016 Emerson East Eakin Park Plan recommending medium density residential for the site, calling for a local street network to provide access should the site redevelop, as well as some other recommendations that are noted in the plan. There are even concept plans in the Emerson East Eakin Park Plan that talk about redevelopment of the site in ways that are consistent with the project that's before you tonight. Going back with that, they called for a density up to 40 units an acre on the site. The project is the proposed project with 311 units on roughly 7 acres of net developable land is slightly denser than that 44.2 units an acre, but certainly very close to that recommendation, which keys off the 2006 comprehensive plan densities. However, the 2018 comprehensive plan generalized future land use maps do recommend higher density for the site. This is medium residential on the 2018 generalized future land use maps, which allow a more generous 20 to 90 units an acre. So well within that. There are also residential redevelopment recommendations in the 1998 Yahara River Parkway Master Plan. My apologies. That look for the site to be developed at a somewhat lower density with a scale that transitions down as you get closer to the river. However, staff feels that the 2016 Emerson East Eakin Park Yahara neighborhood plan provides more contemporary recommendations for the site and for the area adjacent to the Yahara River Parkway. And so we feel that despite some disagreement in forms and being a little denser than what the Yahara master plan called for, that on balance, the Plan Commission can find that the project is consistent with plan guidance. Further, we also believe that the Plan Commission may find that the conditional use standards are met, subject to the conditions in the recommendations section. And finally, that the proposed certified survey map can meet the applicable criteria for approval, noting that while the proposed CSM will dedicate the beginning of the east-west public street that is recommended in the Emerson East Eakin Park Yahara neighborhood plan, there are other streets that plan also shows, one of which staff recommends a reservation be put in place using a building setback line to make sure that nothing gets built within 30 feet of the easterly property line of the site, so that if a north-south street was to be constructed in the future, that there would be land available on this site for acquisition of that right-of-way and construction of the future street. So in summary, staff believes that the Plan Commission may find that the standards for approval are met, giving careful consideration in particular to the actions and recommendations of the Landmarks Commission. We are recommending approval of both the conditional use and the certified survey map, subject to the many, many conditions of approval on pages 14 through 27 of the staff report, and I would be happy to answer any questions after the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I will open the public hearing. The first registrant we'll hear from is Darren Jolis, West Wacker Drive, Chicago, Illinois, in support, wishing to speak. And although he said he wasn't representing an organization, I believe he's representing Vermilion Development. But perhaps, Darren, you could clarify.
Hi, thank you, Chair. This is Darren Jolis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Terrific. Yes, I'm Darren with Vermilion Development. Next slide, please, if that's you, Tim, that's controlling. Yeah, and for those that aren't familiar, we began working on a residential development at this location, 1617 Sherman, almost a year and a half ago. Next slide, please. This is a timeline of the important dates for the project. The yellow colors indicate the neighborhood meetings, which we had 4 in total. And the official public meetings are indicated in the blue dates. We've incorporated the UDC comments that we received just 10 days ago, which we'll share as part of our presentation tonight. And we were enthused to receive staff's memo last week that recommended approval. Next slide, please. From the beginning, we were guided by the mayor's Housing Forward Plan, which recognized an additional 70,000 people moving to Madison in the next 2 decades and the need for 10,000 new homes in the next 5 years. This project is intended to be a small part of the solution to that problem. And while this urban infill location can support significant density, the comprehensive plan calls out medium density, or roughly 675 units, which Tim mentioned. We heard the feedback from the neighborhood, those yellow meetings that we just talked about, and designed a project with a total of 331 residences, or about 49% of what is allowed. We reduced the total parking count by over 220 cars, and we enclosed 90% of those parking stalls indoors, which had the added benefit of creating roughly 5 times the open space requirement. Next slide, please. We'd like to highlight some of the ways in which we've activated the site in response to the UDC feedback. Our plan includes this new City of Madison street that you'll see running towards the northern portion of the site, which allows for long-range planning and the connectivity in this part of the isthmus. This new street and Sherman Avenue have been activated by 32 residences that have direct pedestrian walk-up access. This plan shows those connections in like a purplish color, which might be sort of difficult to see. The sidewalks in yellow are those along both sides of the new street that will be included. And then the blue provides pedestrian activation to the balance of the site. Next slide, please. In a somewhat troubling sign, the number of permitted residential units in 2022 was 30% greater in the communities surrounding Madison than in Madison itself. This growth comes at a cost in the form of longer travel times and congestion and pollution. And by locating housing here at 1617 Sherman, we feel this project helps buck that trend. Our project is aligned with Imagine Madison. It's consistent with the Emerson East Eakin Park Yahara neighborhood plan, and it does fall within the transit-oriented development district. Next slide, please. Now, allow me to introduce Doug Hirsch with Potter Lawson, and Doug can talk a little bit more about the project that he and his team have done such a great job designing. Thank you.
Yes, our next registrant is Doug Hirsch, University Row, Madison, in support, wishing to speak and representing Vermilion Development. And the first 3 speakers are pooling their time as representatives of the developer. Doug, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is Doug Hirsch with Potter Lawson. We are the architects of the project. And I just want to run through just a few of the exterior design images for your information. This slide shows the building A from Sherman Avenue, and you can see the 2 wings and a courtyard and a green roof in the center. The 2 wings are 4 stories at the street and then step back to 5 stories. On that 5th story are sort of activated roof terraces with common amenity spaces. Also, you'll notice that all the units on this floor, on this facade, have outdoor terraces and are walk-up units and are connected to the public street. On the next slide, please. And this shows a detail of some of those outdoor terraces and walk-up units along Sherman Avenue to help activate the street. The next slide, please. Additionally, to activate the street, we have this green roof within the courtyard here, made possible because we're covering up the parking. The parking is majority of the parking is structural, and the green roof creates this courtyard and this shade structure to continue to activate the street facade. Next slide, please. Also, we heard from Urban Design to do more to activate the street. So we have added additional walk-up units. This is a view along the new public street that bisects the site. Also at the corner of Building A here is the main entrance to the building. Next slide, please. And this is just a view of Building A between the two buildings, and in the foreground you can see the biodetention meadow space. Next slide. And then this is one of the townhome buildings. They also face the public street, and they also do have all outdoor terraces for each one of the units. These are mostly 2 bedrooms with several 3-bedroom units and more sort of family-oriented apartments. We also made some changes to the exterior design based on UDC comments. Next slide, please. And then also these are the townhomes, the 5 townhomes that are behind the ones along the street. And just a quick, we made some changes to the exterior materials based on Urban Design comments. Next slide, please. And the final slide of Building C, also facing the street. You can see in the foreground the crosswalks, and we'll work with traffic and city engineering to provide sort of pedestrian connectivity across the new public road. And we've added some additional walk-up units along this facade to help engage the street. And I believe Carrie Dixon is signed up next. Thank you.
Okay, Carrie Dixon, West Wacker Drive, Chicago, in support, wishing to speak, representing Vermilion Development. Carrie, you've got the remainder of the time should you need it.
Thank you. And thanks, Doug. My name is Carrie Dixon. I'm a managing director with Vermilion Development, and I'm here to talk about sustainability this evening. Next slide, please. Thank you. Vermilion has a history of forward-looking developments. We consider it, part of our DNA as we complete thoughtful developments to support future residents and the community. And sustainability is obviously important in achieving this goal. And for example, we just completed a building on the University of Illinois campus called the Classroom Instructional Facility. And it is on target to become one of the first net zero energy buildings on campus. And we were able to achieve this stretch goal through creative design to control costs and financing solutions to come up with ways to pay for the additional cost. For this development, we will be achieving Wisconsin Green Built certification. We're working with Focus on Energy to provide an energy model that helps guide decisions in terms of improving energy efficiency. And based upon the analysis, we'll be using greater insulation and high performance windows on the building envelope. We'll be using LED light fixtures throughout the building and in the common areas, placing them on occupancy sensors to reduce electrical usage. And we'll also be installing Energy Star appliances and smart thermostats to promote less energy usage. But beyond these features that are already in our proposal, we are researching creative ways to push towards greater sustainability, as we did on our U of I project. And one of these ideas is to switch to an all-electric building, which will reduce the use of fossil fuels. Everybody realizes that eliminating gas-fired equipment would use cleaner electricity as the fuel source. And we are also researching the use of the recently enacted Inflation Reduction Act, which is a federal law which will support the installation of a geothermal transfer field on the site and utilize heat pumps for the heating and cooling of the homes. Both of those things would significantly reduce the building's carbon footprint and reduce energy. Next slide, please. Other sustainable features are part of the landscaping. We, as was already mentioned, we're using structured parking within the buildings to minimize the amount of paving and impervious surfaces, and allows us to maximize green space on the site. You can see the variety of native plant species which are proposed to serve as habitat for pollinators and do not require irrigation. Next slide, please. And this slide shows how many of these sustainable features express themselves on the site. In the front of this slide, you can see the biodetention swale and the native plantings. Behind that, on the south side of Building C along the ground, we have 18 community gardens planned. And then there are an additional 13 community gardens located near the townhomes. Each of the 31 gardens is about 120 square feet in size. On the second floor of this building, you can see one of the green roof.
Thank you. That does conclude your available 9 minutes for the first 3 speakers. The next registrant is Daniel Wiltrout, Sherman Terrace, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Daniel, you have 3 minutes.
Checking, I'm receiving, or I'm sending. Are you receiving?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, thank you. The Vermillion team has addressed some neighborhood concerns thus far in their plans to develop the Sherman Avenue property on which the Filene building is located. The project is unique, in particular among all residential development projects in the city. It stands on the edge of Filene Park, Lake Mendota, the locks that connect the lake to the Yahara River and Yahara River Parkway, and Tenney Park. And I support reasonable development that meets residential needs now and for the future. I'm here today to comment on items 6, 7, and 8. Item 6, I oppose demolition of the Filene House, recommended as a Madison landmark by the city's Landmark Commission. In my view, reuse of the existing building is a better choice. The Filene building is already zoned for commercial use, and there is space behind the building for housing development. Sherman Terrace offers a neighborhood example of how this could work. It has a 1-story commercial building on Sherman Avenue. The rest of the 216 residential units are on the remainder of the 9 acres in 3-story buildings. And about 60% are owner-occupied. The rest are rental units. Item 7, apart from the commercial zoning for Filene building and to mitigate oversized development contrary to the Yahara neighborhood plan, I oppose rezoning to traditional residential urban, U2, and encourage approval of rezoning in traditional residential varied, or TRV2. TRV2 allows a reasonable number of units per acre that is consistent with the city-adopted Emerson-Aiken Park Yahara neighborhood plan. TRV2 would allow medium-density housing. Its immediate neighbor, has been pointed out, Sherman Terrace Condominium Homes, has under 26 units per residentially zoned acre. Finally, item 6, I oppose what I see as an oversized building project with its encroachment on Sherman Avenue, lingering concerns for water control, natural habitat destruction, traffic challenges to this residential neighborhood. While I certainly support and understand Vermillion's skills in this area, its target demographic of market rate rentals in a census tract characterized as a low-income investment opportunity ignores affordable home housing, which is a top priority in Madison, at least according to Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway. The proposed height and landscaping plans for this project will, I believe, result in a large and visually intrusive edifice that will negatively affect the neighborhood and the green cover over the landmark Yahara Parkway for more than 20 years. Thank you, Alden.
Thank you. Our next registrant is Matt Havey, Wacker Drive, Chicago, in support, wishing to speak. Matt, you have 3 minutes. And are you also representing Vermillion Development?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Matt Havey. I'm a managing director with Vermillion Development. I would like to discuss the potential for adaptive reuse and history of this site. I'd like to start with the existing building. The existing building is not architecturally significant and has no significant defining architectural characteristics. That is according to Potter Lawson, whose predecessor firm was the original architect of the existing structure. In addition, we took a look at the architectural significance and the ability to adapt the building to a multifamily residential use. And we had Isthmus Architecture based in Madison, which focuses on the revitalization of existing historic buildings, analyze the potential for that reuse and rehabilitation of the existing building. Isthmus concluded in a report to us that we've circulated publicly that a conversion to multifamily use would require heavy changes to the existing structure, including gutting the entire interior, re-roofing the whole structure, demolishing and replacing the entire rear entrance, all building systems, and all windows. After those changes, Isthmus estimated that less than 50% of the existing physical building would remain. To quote their report, quote, adaptive reuse in this instance might be more accurately characterized as only partial salvage. They also concluded the existing structure could not support additional floors or underground parking, which is important when considering the feasibility of a new development with an adaptive reuse component on this site. In short, we determined that adapting the building to a residential use is infeasible. Regarding the site's history, the existing building served as the headquarters for CUNA from 1950 to 1960. In 1960, CUNA relocated to its fourth and current headquarters at 5910 Narrow Point Road. Upon its relocation, CUNA removed the cornerstone from their site and has not been involved since with the existing building. That said, a handful of Madison residents expressed to us their desire to recognize the history of the credit union movement on the site. As a result, we have proposed constructing a publicly accessible council circle located along Sherman Ave and dedicated to City Park and adjacent to City Park land. Situated near the council circle would be a display discussing the history of the credit union. We have researched the extensive construction of council circles around Madison, but we would not deign to design the circle by ourselves, and we are seeking input on final design from city and neighborhood stakeholders. We were also pleased that the Common Council in the previous meeting noted by Tim Parks recognized these efforts as satisfactory at commemorating the history of the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. The next registrant is Robert Johnson, Sherman Avenue, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Robert, you have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a home at 1646 Sherman Avenue, which is immediately across the street and up a couple of houses from the proposed project. The people that are most affected by this project are not the people who drive by the site of the proposed project once in a while, not the members of any of the city commissions who have been reviewing the project and holding meetings to discuss, at which comments by the public are limited to 3 minutes, even though my family has lived on this home for 90 years. Not the proposed builders or sponsors of the project itself who do not live anywhere near the site. It is the people who live directly across the street from the project and who are not even notified of the project and to this date have not been contacted about the project. We learned about it by reading in the newspapers. These are the people who have maintained this area as far back as the 1930s to the present, paid significant property taxes for the privilege of living on Lake Mendota with a degree of privacy, living in a single-family residence. These are the people who are not being asked these are the people who are now being asked to be confronted with a structure that has absolutely no compatibility with the existing neighborhood on Sherman Avenue, and who will now be confronted with 400 cars and 600 plus new neighbors on a daily basis, all in the name of density on behalf of the city and profit for the developer and the owner, and the profit that the developer and the owner will enjoy to the detriment of the homeowners on the west side of Sherman Avenue in the immediate area, as well as along Sherman Avenue all the way to Burleigh Street. In fact, the existing or the proposed entry and exit to the proposed building is directly across the street from one of the homeowners' homes on the west side of the street. And that person wasn't even contacted about this project. The building of the proposed structure will completely destroy the character of the area and the park-like setting of Kenny Park. Further, with the proposed addition of the apartment complex, together with the new apartments along Aburn and those proposed for the Oscar Mayer property, as well as Hartmeyer Arena area, will create a traffic nightmare for the existing residents on both North Sherman Avenue as well as Sherman Avenue. The suggestion that at some point in time there will be a street between Sherman Avenue to Fordham at the project site is a proposal without verification as to any contemplated completion date. And to even complete it, they'd have to go to the back of this particular site. There's an 8-foot drop, and then behind that drop over to Fordham are a myriad of apartment complexes and parking lots. There's no plan for a street. It's a dream. Further, even today.
Thank you, Robert. That concludes your available time. The next registrant is Dave Grace, Sherman Avenue, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Dave, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm a 25-year resident of Tenney Lapham and 25-year credit union professional. I would ask, please don't put in place a plaque commemorating credit unions. If you want to do something, put in place affordable housing. This development will do nothing to solve our affordable housing issue in the city. This is high rent luxury housing. The city council has already approved 2 to 4 times the amount of housing last year alone that we need to have our meet our 10,000 units. I am in favor of redevelopment of this site, but not this development. The demolition of this building is directly against the first recommendation in a decade from the Plan Commission, which the City Council, when I attended that meeting, did not have very much debate on this. They went straight for, let's move forward, and I do not believe gave it sufficient thought. The most sustainable thing that can do, environmentally sustainable thing, is not to demolish buildings. This is not an issue of either redevelopment or historic development. You can have both. It just takes a little bit more time, just like affordable housing. You can have affordable housing at this site. It would just take more work. And my last concern is around traffic. I think it was the third slide that Darren showed in the routing of the parking lots in there. Do nothing to think about all of the neighbors and delivery vehicles, which all of us have lots of delivery vehicles coming to our house for food service, Amazon, what have you. And I can't fathom how these delivery vehicles for 331 units are going to turn around in there and exit. There's one way in, one way out, along with all the other traffic there. This is going to be a mess inside the development and along Sherman Avenue. Already, Sherman, given the traffic flows, should have bike bumpers. It does not have a bike bumper right now. With this new traffic, as well as the traffic that will be coming down Sherman and up Sherman. The upward side of this does have a bike lane. The downward side does not have bike bumpers or bike lanes. And city engineering has done nothing about this. And city engineering study has not looked further downstream. In conclusion, I would just say that this development will diminish the value of neighboring properties as a result of its inappropriate size, density, and building scale, and the resulting undue burden on public infrastructure and city service. These actually aren't my words. That's Vermilion Development.
Thank you, Dave. That does conclude your available time. The next registrant is Kirk Biodrowski, University Row, Madison, in support and wishing to speak, representing Vermilion Development. Kirk, you have 3 minutes.
Hello. Tim, can you put up slide 18 for us, please? Thank you. Thank you. My name is Kirk Biodrowski with Potter Lawson. I wanted to talk a little bit about the project being adjacent to the Yahara River Parkway landmark. As you are probably aware, the landmark staff report states that the proposed development is not so large or visually intrusive as to adversely affect the historic character or integrity of the adjacent design landmark. This slide illustrates the proposed 30-foot vegetative tree and underbrush buffer. This area will be maintained by the development team in conjunction with input from the Parks Division. The goal is to strategically return the area to a more native state while at the same time preserving the visual buffer currently afforded by the existing trees and underbrush. Please note that the buildings are between 56 to 146 feet away from the property line. So not only does this help reduce the visual impact of the buildings, but provide space for the existing tree roots to continue to grow. Next slide, please. Next slide, Tim. These are images of proper, oops, one back. Can you go back one? Thank you. These are images of other properties currently existing along the Yahara River Parkway, including the Yahara Landing apartments, which are adjacent to the project site. One could argue whether these existing buildings are intrusive for the river views. In contrast and by design, this project will not be exposed from the river. 2 slides ahead, please. Here is a section through the river at the proposed site showing the buildings are 120 to over 200 feet from the river's edge. In addition, this section illustrates how multiple natural vegetative areas will visually block views from the river, including the 30-foot buffer on the site. Next slide, please. These next 2 slides will show how the building may be viewed from the Tenney Park parking lot. The trees and underbrush clearly cover the entire building. It would be even more difficult to see through the vegetation from the river. And then next slide. When in full foliage, the building all but disappears. And the final slide, please. In conclusion, the vegetative buffer the developer has granted the city and the distance the buildings are from the landmark is the reason that landmark staff recommended that this project meets the requirements for a project adjacent to a landmark. And we are available for questions on any of this stuff. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirk. The next registrant is John Rolling, Orchard Drive, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. John, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I nominated Filene House for landmarks designation. My nomination was based on the building's association with the rise of the national and international credit union movement during the mid-20th century. But this is not just credit union history, it is Madison history. Madison's people and institutions helped fund the Filene House site purchase and the building's construction. And our city benefited from becoming the center of the credit union world during CUNA's occupancy of Filene House from 1950 to 1979. The Landmarks Commission has determined that not only does Filene House have historic value, but that it should be designated a city landmark. Filene House should not have to justify its existence further, but we are only talking now because the Vermilion project poses a false choice between historic preservation and development. Clearly, the 8-acre site can accommodate both. We have many great examples of adaptive reuse of existing buildings along with infill construction here in Madison, and we have several local developers with the expertise to accomplish such projects. If Vermilion lacks the interest and experience to do adaptive reuse, then it is fairly simple, even using the proposed certified survey map, to divide the site with Vermilion building on east and north vacant land and another developer adapting the existing building to housing use. So I urge the Plan Commission to refer Vermilion back to work with the Landmarks Commission on a plan for adaptive reuse of Filene House as part of a larger project. But if you cannot find it in your hearts to preserve this historic building, then I propose that you do the next best thing, to preserve a documentary record of this legacy. I have seen the 8 photos of the existing building that Vermilion submitted with its demolition application. These are woefully inadequate to chronicle the building's appearance and features for posterity. Standards for the documentation of historic buildings have been crafted by professional historians over many years. These can be readily applied to the Filene House case. Therefore, I call on the Plan Commission to condition any approval of demolition on Vermilion's working with the Landmarks Commission on a plan for documenting the historic building to National Park Service and/or State Historic Society of Wisconsin standards. I thank you, and I will be available for questions should you have them.
Thank you, John. Our next registrant is Ed Jordan, Sherman Terrace, Madison, opposed, wishing to speak. Ed, you've got 3 minutes.
Hello. Thank you for this time. I oppose the project at 1617 Sherman Avenue as it currently stands for 2 reasons: adaptive reuse versus demolition and affordable housing. On adaptive reuse versus demolition, I, like many of my neighbors at Sherman Terrace, agree that the property should be redeveloped. Because this project will be our neighbor for decades to come, I wish to give voice to reusing the building on this site. Filene House fits the scale of the area, nestled in a corner of Tenney Park and not dominating the neighborhood. I believe the building is a prime candidate for lofts that could be a centerpiece of this otherwise been there, done that project. During the many meetings I have attended on this project, the party line from Potter Lawson is that Filene House has outlived its useful life and cannot be reused. And yet, Potter Lawson proudly trumpets their work on 2 East Washington Avenue adaptive reuse projects: Hotel Indigo, which reused the Kluter Wholesale Grocery Warehouse Mott's Paint Building, and Archipelago Apartments, which reuses the Wisconsin Telephone Garage and Warehouse Building. Both of these projects, in my opinion, are quite exciting. Let's do the same with Filene House. I urge the commission, the city, the developers to not demolish this building. Potter Lawson's motto is "We listen, we respond, we deliver." To all 3 I ask, to whom? Let's hold them and this project to Potter Lawson's motto. On affordable housing, during the last Landmark Commission meeting, a member of the developers team from Urban Assets stated that affordable housing was not on the table for this site because the neighborhood was too affluent. I got to say, that got my attention. I don't know the whole area, but I'm very familiar with Sherman Terrace, Lakewood Gardens, River's Edge, Yahara Landing, and Briarwood. We are a proud mix of owners and renters from a range of socioeconomic statuses. But affluent? That seems to be a stretch. Our census tract 18.04 is designated as low income. A market rate apartment complex with no affordable housing units will put additional economic pressure on the established residents of this area. If it is in your power, I urge you to consider going back to the table and make some of the housing of this project affordable. Yes, our neighborhood needs more dense housing, but it needs smart, affordable housing. Let's find a way to do that. The city's vision is not just for more housing, it is for more affordable housing. As it stands now, I see an affluent playground that detracts from the surrounding hardworking neighborhood instead of enhancing it. I am not against redeveloping this site. I just think it can be smarter and more inclusive. I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ed. The next registrant is Mary Alice Wimmer, Sherman Avenue, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Mary Alice, you have 3 minutes.
You hear me?
Yes.
I am strongly opposed. I live on Sherman Avenue. I'm a retired art professor and some art history, including some architecture, history of architecture. I am so opposed to this horrible, gigantic copying of so many other buildings that look just like it in Madison, sadly. And I'm wondering why no one has thought about Doty School or Lincoln School. Both have been repurposed into either condos or apartments, and they fit the area that they were built in. And unfortunately, the project that Vermillion is proposing does not fit. It's aesthetically ugly. It's too big. They say things like they're going to provide pollinator planting. What is that? We suffer from a lack of bees right now and butterflies. And the environment they're not doing anything for the environment. They're blocking the sun. The traffic situation is terrible now, and it's not going to get any better. And as Bob Johnson said, a street going through from Sherman to Fordham. Has anybody walked over there? Have anybody on the council looked at that? It's just impossible. I'm just so sad about this, and I just hope to God, hope to whoever, that you'll put a stop to this. Thank you.
Thank you. The next registrant is Alex Salutos, Hammersley Avenue, Madison, neither support nor opposed and wishing to speak. Alex, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Tim, did you get those slides? Thank you. Just a second here. I support redevelopment of this site. This proposal is not yet. Adaptive reuse of the Filene House will not stop redevelopment or downsize it. Next slide. The rehab work and costs cited by Vermilion are typical for a project like this. What you heard is crocodile tears. This slide's from the neighborhood plan, which recommends preservation or adaptive reuse of the Filene House. Next slide. The Filene House takes up less than 15% of the land area. It's a 8.19 acre site, 6.87 acres, more than 80% of it is behind the Filene House. After extractions for the Filene House, including the green space, the street, the detention basins, we're left with 5.6 acres. Adaptive reuse of the Filene House also provides a visual buffer along Sherman Avenue and maintains the scale and character of the neighborhood. Next slide. I'm going to show you quickly 4 concepts here. This is a 3-story concept that gives you 28 to 35 units an acre. Next slide. This concept gives you 45 to 70 units an acre, a 4-story with a central garage structure. Next slide. This gives you 80 to 95 units an acre. It's 5-story with a central garage. Next slide. And then 4 or 5-story over a podium garage gives you 90 to 110 units an acre. Next slide. The comp plan recommends 20 to 90 units an acre, which would give you up to between 164 to 797 units an acre. The 4 concepts I just showed you, the midpoint would be 351 to 463 units an acre. Vermilion asked for 331. The numbers on this slide are on the limited area after extracting the Filene House. So it's clear you can, do adaptive reuse without limiting the project. Next slide. A couple of other points. One, I want to make sure that you are very careful about the scale of this project. Next slide. In the context of its surroundings. This is primarily single-family residential. The Sherman Terrace buildings are very modest in size. Next slide. Next slide. So this is to scale. Shows you the Filene House. Shows
Alex,
you what this project.
This concludes your available time. Thank you. The next registrant is Timothy Jones, North Sherman Avenue, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Timothy, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Oh, so many people who have spoken so well on matters that I believe in. I am opposed and vehemently so, and it just adds one more cause to have the question as to whether or not proper signage was posted. Living on Sherman Avenue and coming and going all the time, I did not see such signage. My experience of having traveled the neighborhood outbound, as Bob Johnson had mentioned, all these other developments which are going up, which are going to end up feeding traffic by this particular location. When I have been traveling out in those locations, those signs have actually been the reason I even knew about those developments. The people who I am most concerned about in terms of the traffic effects are not just the people who are trying to exit driveways across from this particular location, one who will end up heading directly into the new street, which would be at some point developed. My biggest concern are for the bicyclists. It was very articulately said. This particular thoroughfare already deserves to have bike bumpers. The lanes that are there are inadequate for the protection given the amount of traffic existing. And so the increase will be even more concerning. And cyclists are the ones who are most likely to have a concern and not have noticed that this is actually coming up for conversation. There are a number of other issues that have me stretched in terms of my giving due respect to the process, because I believe due process is being shortcut here and there all the way along. The alder was able to attend one meeting and then left office. The seated alder currently has not been active in notifying residents about the meeting, this one or others. There have been a number of times in which I have seen written comment not being entered into Legistar in a timely manner. There are the most recent Urban Design Commission essentially allowed an initial approval, despite the fact that they didn't actually receive all of the proper documents from Vermilion in a timely manner to reveal. And so they were confused about a number of things and acknowledged that confusion in their meeting. I mean, all of that adds up to having a hard time giving due respect to the process, having full due process. I am really surprised at the decision that you made at the outset, and I hope you modify that decision in considering all of the comments. The last thing, in terms of scale, I agree with what has been suggested in terms of adaptive reuse as well. In terms of the density, given the Yahara plan and the sensitive natures of the things which are going to be much more permanent than all of the ecology that is already existing on that site being essentially stripped away, just because in part, people believe that somehow only hardwood, beautiful trees deserve to be in this world of ours. That is a crazy thing.
Tim, that concludes your available time. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next registrant is Larry Nesper, Sherman Terrace, Madison, opposed, wishing to speak, representing the Sherman Terrace Neighborhood Association. Larry, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. We are the immediate neighbor of the proposed development. In our letter to the commission, we addressed the issue of Filene House demolition, affordable housing, and the value of the trees currently living on the site. Those have also been addressed in remarks made by other members and neighbors, so I'll confine my remarks to the issue of density for this neighborhood. The proposal envisions a density that is far greater than anything nearby. Furthermore, it exceeds the minimum residential density of 16 to 40 units per acre that was recommended in the 2016 Emerson East Ekin Park Yahara River Neighborhood Plan for this property. This neighborhood plan was adopted by the City Common Council as a supplement to the City of Madison Comprehensive Plan, with the expectation that the implementation will, quote, continue to take place over the next 10 to 15 years, unquote. Neither of the conceptual site plans for this property outlined in this plan exceeded 200 units. Yet Vermilion currently proposal of 350 units, at least according to their website that's advertising this property, and that includes a 6-story building, no less, maybe something that they want to change as they go forward. Anyway, the proposed density also exceeds the recommendation of the 1998 Yahara River Parkway Master Plan. Quoting now from that plan, new residential construction should create housing types and densities that are consistent with existing housing adjacent to each redevelopment site. Each housing development should have affordable housing component, unquote. As we know, there's no affordable component in this program, and this housing that's being proposed is not really very consistent with what is already here. The Yahara River Parkway Plan recommended 16 to 25 dwelling units per acre with selected areas as high as 26 to 40. The preferred density in the 2016 plan concords with this earlier recommendation and represents recognition of the larger context. The proposed development is sited on a largely residential two-lane street and is adjacent to Tenney Park. Other developments in the city of this scale are serviced by 4- and 6-lane arterial streets. The preferred medium density reflects a concern about more traffic on Sherman Avenue, especially the segment that passes through Tenney Park. 350 units or 331 units means about 420 or 397 cars that are going to be moving about on this property, including the delivery vehicles. Insofar as grocery stores, pharmacies, coffee shops, restaurants, and other services are not within easy walking distance, and the transit network redesign cuts back on bus service to Sherman Avenue, residents at 1617 will need to use their cars with great frequency. The increase in traffic compromises the safety and recreational value of the park for pedestrians, bicyclists, and users.
Thank you, Larry. That concludes your available time. The next registrant is Thomas Reps, Sherman Avenue, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak. Thomas, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, advance, please. I'd like to make 3 points. First, you should be thinking about this matter as a 75-year decision because the building will likely be used for that long. Your successors are not likely to be asked for permission to demolish it for many, many decades. Advance, please. My second point is that among the plans you've approved is the Yahara River Parkway Master Plan. Some of the plan items are already implemented and they're excellent, such as the bike and pedestrian underpasses in the Johnson Street and East Washington Avenue bridges. Advance, please. Tim Parks referred to the Yahara River Parkway Master Plan, which contained recommendations about the development of 1617 Sherman Avenue in the form of these 2 concept drawings. The plan calls for much less density at 1617 Sherman Avenue than Vermilion is proposing, maybe around 200 dwelling units in total, as others have mentioned. Advance, please. My third point is that you should not roll over for these developers. The Plan Commission should insist that Madison and the neighborhood gets a good outcome based on a good design. Consider, for example, the apartments around James Madison Park. Here, the city was fortunate to have enlightened developers. Instead of constructing gigantic new apartment complexes, they reused the existing pumping station and Lincoln School buildings. As we heard in this meeting, the developers have said that Filene House is not suitable for adaptive reuse. It was stated by Matt Havey that the configuration was not appropriate in its present form, but 50% could be used. I'm sure that some architects would view that as an opportunity to be creative. For example, one of the spaces in Lincoln School was the gymnasium, not exactly ideal for apartments. However, Urban Land Interest put 4 apartments in the gym. I know that because I rented one of them the first 3 years I lived in Madison. Advance, please. The Parkway Master Plan also considered new construction, saying that it should reflect the overall character, scale, and aesthetic attributes of the surrounding neighborhoods. Advance. The City Row apartment complex on Johnson Street is a great example of new construction that matches the character and scale of its neighborhood. Advance, please. Here's what Vermilion is proposing to face Tenney Park. Advance, please. A lower height seems better to me. Advance, please. Finally, consider the Vermilion plan for Sherman Avenue. Advance, please. That photo that I had was taken from the same point as nearly as I could place it. I don't see how anyone can say that this proposal is in keeping with the overall character, scale, and aesthetic attributes of the surrounding neighborhood. Contrary to what a Vermilion person said earlier in this meeting, the Landmarks Commission did not say the building was appropriate for being near the parkway. Commissioner McLean said that the design echoes downtown infill or an office park in the suburbs. I agree and urge you not to approve any measures that would allow the present plan to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. The next registrant is Eric Hamilton, Rutledge Street, Madison, support and wishing to speak. Eric, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Hamilton. I live in District 6, down the river from the proposed project, and I encourage you to approve the project as proposed and submit it to Common Council's next meeting. The hundreds of proposed units represent a much-needed influx of housing to the bustling Isthmus area. And the developer's responsiveness to community and city committee feedback has demonstrated, I think, that they are worthy of approval after a years-long process. The historical discussion has come and passed, and Common Council has made their opinions clear. The building is not architecturally significant, and its history is not better than housing for people. The plan aligns with the neighborhood plan calling for medium density on the site, and it would improve stormwater management in a sensitive area by bringing what is currently, mostly, an oversized parking lot up to modern stormwater standards implemented after the 2018 floods. I understand that people find it unsatisfying to build market rate housing thinking it won't meet affordable housing needs. Not directly, no. But there is a simple law of supply and demand throughout our city. We have an immense amount of demand for housing as more people discover and move to our great city. And we have limited supply, driving up prices and reducing the power of renters. Increasing the supply of market rate housing has been shown to open up opportunities in more modestly priced buildings, as we would expect. I say let's build many more such buildings until rent really comes down. I think we'd all love to see that. Please support the project and send to Common Council so we can get shovels in the ground and welcome new residents sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Our next registrant is Eric Welsh, Spate Street, Madison, support and wishing to speak. Eric, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'll keep this short. I'd like to start by saying what a beautiful site this is. Not just it's specifically this, but out of the entirety of Madison, it's a really cool area. Not just in Tenny Lapham. It'll be wonderful to see it turn into housing. It'll drastically improve what is there now, which is just obviously a vacant building and a huge parking lot. I have completed 3 adaptive U reuse projects in Madison, State Line Distillery, Tinsmith, and Stephanie's warehouse. And I just would not have interest personally in reusing this building for a number of reasons, besides its stated poor structure and lack of visual interest. The most important reason being that the need for housing far outweighs the value this building could deliver repurposed. Its position in that lot truly hinders the development, which has been thoughtfully designed. So saying that, I'm happy for all the future tenants of this building. It's 400 to 500 people that'll get to enjoy the best of Madison, the parks, the water, the river, all within close distance to downtown. It's truly a great place to live, and to share that with as many people as possible and still maintain a good vibe is possible, and it's being done. We don't need another office building or more retail right now. We have a real need for housing.
Thank you, Eric. That concludes your available time. The next registrant is Jessica Wharton-Weiler, Rutledge Street, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. Jessica, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to voice my support for this project. This is a great site for housing, and neighbors and council members agreed when the comprehensive plan passed Common Council in 2016. The comprehensive plan recommended a medium density residential use for this site, which is 2 to 5 stories with 20 to 90 units per acre. The proposed plan is 44 units per acre, which is well within that recommendation. The comprehensive plan was passed in 2016, but the need for more housing has only increased since the plan was passed. The construction of new housing in Madison has not kept pace with our population growth, which increased by 16% between 2010 and 2020, and that was the largest increase in the state. Madison has had one of the lowest rental vacancy rates in the entire country for the last decade, which really drives up prices and puts power in the hands of landlords rather than renters. According to a recent Wisconsin State Journal article, the city needs 15,000 more housing units to be built in the next 4 years just to keep up with demand. So this is a good start with 331 units, but there's still a lot more housing that needs to be built in this city. And I'd personally rather see those units being built close to the city center, next to public transportation, and in walkable, bikeable areas than pushed out to the suburbs, which forces a dependency on cars and actually creates more traffic in the city from people commuting via car from the suburbs to the city center. Common Council did not choose to landmark this building, and I believe that's because they recognized the need for more housing outweighed the architectural importance of this building. And I would urge commissioners to put the needs of the city first and to vote in support of this project.
Thank you, Jessica. Our next registrant is Lindsay Lee, Williamson Street, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. Lindsay, you have 3 minutes. Lindsay?
Lindsay, you should see a prompt to unmute yourself. It might be underneath the
Here I
Zoom
am.
window. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I'm in a car driving with my family in Berkeley, California, headed to a restaurant. And of course, we were in a traffic jam, but I hope you can hear me. The point I'd like to make is that this is a perfect site for density. For urban parks, parks are most important for those who live in apartment buildings. Unlike those of us who have single-family homes on green lots, they do not have readily access to outdoor greenery. Those of us who have houses on single-family lots, we can go in our backyard and grill, et cetera, et cetera. We have a front yard in many cases. I think most cities, you do see density next to parks, and it steps down to, especially large parks, you have density and steps down to smaller housing. I guess I'd like to end with, those of us who are older, I'm 57, those of us who are older and, many years ago bought our homes, we need to be welcoming and magnanimous to younger people, mostly younger people who are moving here and would like their part, to get their part of the Madison dream. So I urge you to support this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Our next registrant is Victor Taniolo, Horde Street, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. Victor, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Liddell. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'd like to thank Eric Hamilton for his wonderful speech. I 100% agree with everything he said about supply and demand. I'd like to put a name to the phenomenon he's talking about. It's called rent filtering. Obviously, the developers think they are going to get some very high rents for this development, but that means that people will be moving out of lower rent apartments and so on and so forth. It does take a couple of years, but I'd like for everyone to recognize that Madison's vacancy rate is effectively zero. All units will be filled, and so anyone who moves into this building, at least 331 people, I understand, will be opening up 331 other apartments. So I urge the Plan Commission to consider the fact that there are 331 voices at minimum not being heard tonight. I will see the rest of my time because I just like to say that this is a great development. I wish it were a little bigger, but please vote in favor.
Thank you, Victor. The next registrant is Ellie Silver, Lakewood Garden Lane, Madison, support and wishing to speak. Ellie, you have 3 minutes.
Hello, thank you. My name is Ellie Silver and I rent in the Lakewood Gardens area, so a neighbor of this new development. And I just want to say that I was so excited when I heard about it that I registered to join this meeting, which is something I've never done before. And it's exciting to be a resident in Madison because it's in a constant state of development and improvement. And this project to develop that 70 plot really supports that initiative. So it also helps keep Madison a safe, affordable place to live that continues to earn rankings as best place to live in the United States, which is so cool. And it's an honor to live in the city. So I think it's really important to support and continue to move forward with these proposed renovations. Additionally, it's eco-friendly. It's housing in a beautiful neighborhood that will allow multiple people to enjoy the lake and the river and the park. The current plot is holding an office space, and most people are working from home these days. According to Pew Research Center, there are almost 60% of the U.S. workforce is telehealth, So with those people needing fewer office spaces and more homes, it's important that we support that housing. Additionally, by the year 2030, the population of Wisconsin will increase by 20%, and those people are going to need some places to live. Personally, I really love that this project supports environment, eco-friendly in building materials, and native plants that are going to bring pollinators to the area and support the wildlife. So thank you for the time, and I encourage you to support this project.
Thank you, Ellie. Our next registrant is Marcel Colbert, Regent Street, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. Marcel, you have 3 minutes.
Sure, there's no person in attendance by that name.
Okay, thank you. The next registrant is William Butcher, South Brook Street, Madison, support and wishing to speak. You have 3 minutes, William.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks very much for having me. I guess just a few points. I think one thing we all talk about these days, either on Plan Commission or in city business or just residents, is the housing shortage and what's going on, why it's so expensive to live here, how we address the housing shortage. And the agenda here tonight, is going to provide 331 housing units. But it seems like the obvious answer to this that, well, how do you address a housing shortage? And building housing seems like too easy of an answer, but it actually is one of the primary things you can do. So it's really easy as a plan commission, as a body, as a city to encourage more housing. I guess particularly on a site that has gone through a lengthy public engagement process in 2016 with the the Sherman Avenue, Yahara Tenney neighborhood plan. And at that time, neighborhood residents were invited. The city staff was invited. There was 3 or 4, or at least 3 public engagement sessions and multiple online surveys and whatnot to establish what was the highest and best use for this property. And, there was a couple of things indicated there. And this plan presented now kind of meets and addresses what the highest best use according to the public and the neighbors identified at the time. And here we are, 6-7 years later, when someone comes along and actually proposes something that aligns with that future land use plan that the city adopted. And that was this medium density housing. And I'd just like to echo what Lindsay said, just a couple of people before me, that I hadn't really thought of in that sense. I'm just kind of a pro-housing person in general. But what Lindsay said was important is that, well, who needs access to public spaces the most? Is it the people who have, a park in their front yard and backyard or on their lakeside yard, like I guess Mr. Johnson, who lives a few doors down from this site? And I had a few minutes in between his testimony and now to look up the public record and see that, he's got 10,000 square feet and a quarter acre on the lake. Well, if Mr. Johnson were applied to this site, you get 30 of those. Like, it's not quite what's happening here. We have a more democratization of access to public spaces immediately adjacent. So I think it's a pretty valuable thing to consider, who gets access to that and where our policy's leading. I guess just a couple of things. I guess the public access that Lindsay mentioned really stuck out to me.
Thank you, William. That concludes your available time. The next registrant is Tom Wilson, Clark Court, in support and wishing to speak. You have 3 minutes, Tom.
Thank you. I'm here tonight, as you know, to speak strongly in favor of this. We need housing of all kinds all over the city. Historic preservation can be important, but it needs to be balanced against the needs of people now and in the future. As you well know, spaces of this size are somewhat rare, particularly on the Isthmus. This space's proximity to the lake, public green space, and Tenney Park being near all-day transit, close to employment, entertainment, and restaurants, simply by virtue of being on the isthmus, makes this a somewhat unique site. And I really hope we don't let this opportunity slip through our fingers. As you heard from staff, it is consistent with plan guidance, area plan guidance. And I also believe it to be largely inconsistent with our transportation plans. I did think that the parking ratio of 1.36 did feel a shade high, given the location and that most of these units are efficiency in one bedroom. Personally, I would have liked to see a parking ratio closer to 1, but I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. I did notice that the applicant selected unbundling parking as one of their transportation demand management options, and I think that is absolutely huge. Not forcing people to pay for parking that they don't want is a really big deal. And kind of in closing, I live over by Brittingham Park, and there are a number of underutilized spaces close to my house. And I really hope to see a project like this coming my way in the coming years. It's important to remember that dense development is green development, sort of inherently. And I really hope you can support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Our next registrant is Nicole Hessels, Endeavor Lane, in support and wishing to speak. Nicole, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'm here to speak in support of housing and specifically the 1617 Sherman Avenue project. I'm representing my experience, which since I've been here is a unique one to share. I work for a large corporation here in Madison, and my role is the Senior Director of Employee Experience. It's critical that projects like 1617 Sherman Avenue continue to be approved and supported. Housing opportunities help corporations like mine attract and retain worldwide top talent right here in Madison, Wisconsin. Housing, and specifically the lack of housing, plays a negative impact on the employee experience. And while I recognize the needs for affordable housing, there's also a need to support a variety of socioeconomic needs in our community. We currently struggle to secure housing for our early to mid-career lab talent employees, and they're choosing to move significantly outside of the Madison area, which does not support our 2 locations centrally located in Madison. The 1617 Sherman Avenue is a great example of housing that supports our early and mid-career employees. Our employees want this, need this, and are waiting extensive amounts of time to find housing, and ultimately, some are choosing not to take job opportunities with our company. I encourage you to support this project and support corporations like mine because our employees need housing, and we want to continue to attract absolutely fabulous community members and worldwide top talent to Madison, Wisconsin. Thank you for your time and your support of this project.
Thank you, Nicole. The other registrants do not wish to speak. I will read those in. Andrea Jancourt, Sherman Terrace, Madison, opposed, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. And Donna Jancourt, Village Green Court, Green Bay, opposed, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Let me see if there's any others. Don Lee, Cedarburg, Wisconsin, neither support nor oppose, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions, representing Vermilion Acquisitions and Traffic Analysis and Design. William Norman, Raywood Road, Madison, support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Lindsay Nye, Timberlake Trail, Madison, support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Kira Light, Chapman Street, Madison, support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Brandon Haas, Central Park Place, Fitchburg, support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. And that's it of registrants wishing to speak, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Are there questions of any of our registrants? Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question probably for Darren or somebody on the Vermilion staff. We've heard quite a few times here that this is in a area that is walking and pedestrian and bicycle friendly. But it looks to me like a case of you can't get there from here. There's a path network in the neighborhood, but you end up with a very difficult couple of blocks on Sherman Avenue. What efforts have been made to make this attractive for biking and pedestrians and to reduce the automobile use at this site? It's an extremely important site, in my opinion, from that standpoint of being walkable and bikeable. But I don't feel that the obstacles have been overcome. What have you done to try to overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's Darren again. In terms of overcome, we are on a transit-oriented development route. The bus route is adjacent or walkable to this site, and there is bike paths along Sherman, as well as the bike path along the O'Hara that is, you're right, has a little bit of connectivity through Tenney Park. And I think, Tim and perhaps some of the staff could speak to the connectivity that would be created by this road in the long-term planning, and how that might better enhance some of the bike transit opportunities. But we're doing our best to manage the components on our site. And I know there is a bike sharing program just next door in Tenney Park as well. So that, in addition to the bike parking that we have, the enclosed bike parking, I think are the main attributes.
Okay, thanks. I'll probably have questions of staff on the same nature, but thanks. This is good.
Thank you, Commissioner Fernandez.
That goes down, that goes up.
Other questions of any of the registrants? Alder Paulson.
Yeah, kind of actually along the same veins, and just some connectivity. Have you talked to the folks at Yahara Landing, and can you talk a little bit about sort of what's happening in the back of the lot? There's some really great, a lot of the bus services on Johnson, and if there's any way to help residents get there kind of quick, I think that'd be appreciated, rather than kind of going up and around. If they could pop out the back and get across somehow.
Yeah, we have. We've engaged with them early on in the project when we first started introducing this concept of the road. It became clear that it was really meant to be contained on our site for now. It wasn't necessarily to be connected all the way through. So we've engaged with them. We've started discussions around that. You might recognize there's more or less an easement. It's not truly an easement, but there's a path where many of their residents kind of access through to Sherman across this property. So I think there's a long-term vision of maintaining connectivity, but we don't really have agreements in place at this time.
Okay, thank you. And then this may also be for you, Darren. John Rawling brought up a point that actually I've been talking to some other alders about on historic properties that might reach the historic designation, but aren't, but are still approved for demolition and better documentation. Is that something you would consider? Doing a really great either photographic or actually even a 3D laser scan? They're getting reasonably cheap there for something to really document the interior of the Filene House. Should we approve demolition?
No, thanks for asking. It's the first I've heard of that. It's not something I'm familiar with. I think we're clear that we don't believe the building is historically significant. We've maintained that position throughout, and we understand the commentary of those folks that do and disagree on that topic. So we'll agree to disagree on that subject. That said, we've been proposing an alternative, which we started to speak to, and unfortunately didn't have the slides to necessarily enunciate it as well as we would have liked. And that's this concept of the commemorative, the circle or the commemorative space. And I know some people don't think that's significant enough. On the other hand, there's folks, including the Wisconsin State Historical Society that has started to take interest in that concept. So we're kind of working in a couple different directions, and we're open to input. I think that, as Matt referenced, we do intend and are reaching out to various stakeholders on this very subject. So to the extent that any of the folks who are in the historic preservation space would be willing and able to engage with us on that, we openly invite that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. Is Mr. Rawlings still on the call? Is Mr. Rawlings still?
Yes.
So, Mr. Rawling, you suggested something that, in my professional experience, is very useful when some building does not have a lot of architectural significance, but it has other historical significance, that it be documented in a professional way, according to NPS standards or State Historical Society standards. What would you estimate as the cost of that level of historic documentation?
I can't give you an exact figure on that on the cost, because there are varying levels of documentation that could be involved here. The Historic American Building Survey, for example, standards are pretty serious in terms of documentation and indeed photography that is to last 500 years, as opposed to National Register of Historic Places documentation, which allows for photography that is done, on digital cameras. So that's quite a difference. I would expect for a project like this that we would be looking at professional documentation. There are, and I'm thinking that there is a complete list of folks who are professional National Register nominators held by the Historical Society. And of course, those people work on fees. Relative to the fees for landscape architects or signage folks or traffic engineers and so forth, I suspect that these costs are quite modest.
Yeah. Thank you, John. John, you're not engaged in that historic documentation yourself, are you?
I am retired. I am not looking for work. I'm not taking any work. No, thank you. I did this work at one time. But I'm retired. I don't want to do it anymore. But there are other people who are qualified to do it and can provide the documentation that I think would be necessary and useful for folks in Madison 10, 20, 40, 50, 60, 70 years from now to know what our city has been and where it comes from.
Well, John, I thought you were engaged in this work at some time, and probably we've actually encountered each other. You wouldn't be willing to throw a ballpark cost estimate out on this, would you?
No, I would not.
Okay, thank you.
I have been a real estate appraiser for most of my career. I originally started in historic preservation, but I've been involved in more general real estate appraisal work since.
Thank you, John. I think that answered Commissioner Fernandez's question. Are there additional questions of any of the registrants? Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, the one of the development team that just spoke to something that they were proposing, a monument circle or something that did he have information to present tonight that we just didn't get there? I guess I would just ask him if there was any further information on that, that if he'd like to share that with us, if he has it. If not, then we can move on.
Yes, Matt Havey, do you have information on that?
I do. I apologize. We intended to share some slides when I was speaking in public comment. I'm not sure if Tim Parks has access to those slides right now, but we have some visuals for you.
If you could present those, I would appreciate it.
Tim, are you able to share those slides?
I'm pretty sure he's looking for them.
Yeah, great.
Tim, are you able to pull those up? All right.
Thanks, Tim. So yes, as a result of a handful of Madison residents expressing their desire to recognize the history of the credit union movement on the site, we've proposed constructing a publicly accessible council circle located along Sherman Avenue and adjacent to city parkland. So again, publicly accessible, indicated location indicated where the circle is there on the map. There would be a display situated near the council circle that would discuss the history of the credit union. We've researched the extensive construction of council circles around Madison. We understand the importance of them around Madison, but we would not deign to design the circle by ourselves, and we would like to have input on final design from city and neighborhood stakeholders. So this is a part of our design that is very much, still kind of open, as it was added to the plans pretty late in the process, and as a result of comments from Madison residents interested in commemorating the credit union movement on site. And we did share this plan with Common Council at the meeting a month ago or so, when they were discussing whether or not to landmark the site. I believe there might be one more image, Tim. That could be it. Oh, maybe not. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for pulling this up.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Does that address the question? Great.
Yes, and you were thinking about designing that and funding that with input from the city staff and neighbors?
Yes, we'll make that a cost of the project, so we will pay for it, and we would like neighborhood stakeholders and city staff to and alders, commission members to opine on the design if they'd like to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have any further questions, Commissioner Cantrell?
Not at this point, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any raised hands. I have several questions actually that I would like to ask, and they would be primarily for the development team. Some of our folks that testified have raised questions about the parking and whether there's too much parking. And I suppose I do have that same question. I'm wondering, did you do a study of the possibility of including vehicle share in the project so that you could reduce the number of parking while still having convenient vehicle access for the residents? So this would maybe be Darren.
Yes, it is. Hi. Thank you. We did receive your questions today, and we unfortunately responded to them rather late in the day. So I'm going to read what we had provided a little short while ago. It's quite simply that our experiences at vehicle share services within a multifamily property have not been successful, as there's just not enough use of the vehicle. So we don't intend to put it on the property. I think vehicle share as well as EV chargers was another question. All of those are really amenities to the community that ends up residing in that project. And I think we are open to working with and in tandem with our property management company that would better reflect the needs of those residents. So to the extent that vehicle share was desired, to the extent that additional EV chargers are desired, all that is easy enough to add on in kind of response to what we're hearing from the residents. So I'll pause there.
I would just suggest that EV chargers are not necessarily easy to add if you haven't gotten the infrastructure in during the initial building. Are you saying that you're going to be putting the necessary infrastructure in to add those chargers?
We indeed are going to have the required amount under Madison Code. To the extent that we have capacity to add additional, and I defer to some folks on the engineering team to speak more clearly on that.
Okay. Yeah, because the minimum required is indeed very, very minimal as we're moving more toward electric vehicles. Carrie, you had something to add?
Yeah, this is Carrie with Vermillion Development. I thought I would add to Darren's response. We have been installing EV chargers in our residential developments for about 3 years now. I agree with your comment, Madam Chair, that the infrastructure needs to be in place from the beginning. And we were able to successfully do that on our most recent project. And I think that it is not, that there are ways for us to also include additional capacity for additional chargers in the future. The system that we are using in our current developments is a sophisticated system that's been developed solely for multifamily residential types of situations. And what it allows the chargers to do is to communicate amongst each other and charge the cars that need to be charged. And what that does is greatly expand the capacity of the electrical system. And then it's just a matter of having conduit and raceways in place to install the chargers. So I think that our plan is to do what we've said before in terms of the number of EV chargers that would be there on day one and the raceways in place for kind of just adding additional chargers as the need for them increases. And then to also have spare conduits and spare places where it's easy for us to extend conduits and raceways to be able to expand the system. So that would be our approach to both buildings A and C. And I think previously when we discussed this with staff, we did not say we were going to have any EV chargers in the townhomes. And I think it's fairly straightforward for us to install the plug-in for a more typical residential charger in all of those units, so that it's just a matter of if somebody has an EV car, plugging it in and being able to put it on the wall and allow them to use it.
Thank you very much for that response. I really appreciate that. I do have some other, I still don't see any other hands raised, so I'm going to continue until I see other raised hands. In addition to your green roof, on the remainder of the roofs, are you using cool roof technology? I'm obviously very interested in sustainability kinds of things. Are you using any of the cool roof technology? Carrie again.
Yeah, I have become the sustainability answerer tonight, I think.
Okay,
and I share your appreciation for the topic. When I saw the question, I wasn't aware of the term cool roof, but if you're talking about high albedo, a whitish colored roof that reflects sunlight, yes, that is our intention for the upper roofs on both buildings A and C, as well as the townhomes. It's, from my perspective, kind of standard in the industry now. As we were discussing it with Potter Lawson, there was some concerns about condensation and things like that, but I think that we are well able and well equipped to figure that out and not have it be an issue.
Okay, sounds good. Denver has a requirement for that, just by the way, of the cool roof technology.
Yeah, so does Chicago.
Okay. And then while we're on the sustainability features, you did mention, I think, that you are going to be going or seriously looking at doing entirely like heat pumps for heat and cooling. So it can be all electric buildings. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I think the purpose of my comments earlier today was to say that, we're thoughtful about trying to push the envelope on these types of things. All of these kind of, I'll call deep sustainability items, whether it's heat pumps or EV or photovoltaics on the roof and things like that, do bring additional cost to the project. And it's the goal is to figure out how to manage those costs and find ways to pay for them at the same time. And we want to really put our effort into trying to figure those things out. And one of the things that we're researching is the Inflation Reduction Act, which was recently passed, which provides a tax credit for putting these types of things in, which from our perspective would be a geothermal transfer field as well as moving to heat pumps. It's the most economical way to utilize heat pumps, I think, in a building like this. So we've had a couple calls with some consultants that are experts. The act is relatively new and how it gets applied is still kind of being figured out, but we're actively moving forward in that. And our conversations with Focus on Energy have been very good in terms of that energy model and helping us to balance costs versus energy savings in the future. It's a great program that they run.
Very good. I'm impressed by some of the things you're doing here. You mentioned some other sustainability features in that list you had, and some of them were, kind of the common LED. Are you looking at all induction cooktops? It seems like things are moving very rapidly in that direction in terms of lower cost of operation and not using like the gas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as familiar with induction cooktops. I think of them as more of a safety type of thing where they don't heat up unless there's a pan on them. We'd have to evaluate the cost of that versus what would be our typical cooktop and oven. But what we're trying to do is move to an all-electric building. We'd like to move towards the goals of net zero, which is you don't have a gas connection to your building, right? And you're not burning fossil fuels on site because it's more energy efficient to do it, at a power station kind of thing. And they have controls that make it so that you don't have, gas burning in your unit and in your home and things like that. So we're just in the beginnings of trying to figure that out. We've been talking about it for a couple of months, but quite frankly, until we have a path that we know that we're moving forward on the entitlements,
yes, okay.
we can't really engage the consultants to figure that out.
So, Carrie, I could give you a dozen people that are using around now the induction cooktops. They aren't just for safety; they're
right.
So, if you
I'm
want
no expert, I'm no expert, so I'll take
okay.
any additional information anybody can send me.
And I will go to Commissioner Shepard, and then I may have some other questions too. Commissioner Shepard.
Hi. Yeah. 2 questions for the development team. Looking at the staff report, page 9, I think, there are some questions brought up regarding the demolition permit. If you can address these 2 issues. One, were there any efforts to relocate the building? In the staff report, it mentions that there is nothing on the record right now indicating that was explored. If you have additional information on that, that would be great to share. The second issue related to the demolition permit has to do with the condition of the building. In the staff report, it mentions that your team provided photos and your own analysis, but I'm also sort of interested to find out, did you have anyone else come in and look at the building and provide an assessment in terms of its condition, or is all of that sort of internally driven? And these questions about the demolition, again, both of these go to demolition standard number 1 and also demolition standard number 6, which again, staff does a great job of highlighting in the report. So if you can address those, thanks.
So, Carrie.
Yeah, Commissioner Shepard, thanks for the question. I think that we did not consider moving the building. And in thinking about it now, I'm not quite sure exactly how you would move a building of this size. I think you'd have to take it apart in pieces and reassemble it wherever you're going to move it. It would be more appropriate for a house type of situation than a commercial office building like the Filene House is. With regard to, can you remind me the second half of your question?
Oh, in terms of assessing the condition of the building. In the staff report, it says that, again, and in the materials we received, we get a lot of information from the development team and your folks. But did you have anyone else, an outside third party, or anyone look at the condition of the building and give an assessment?
I'm glad to speak to that, Gary.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Shepard. We had a third party Madison-based architecture firm called Isthmus Architecture study the property and study its potential for adaptive reuse to multifamily. They concluded in a letter to us that we've passed along to the city, so I believe it should be available to you. They concluded that a conversion to multifamily use would require heavy changes to the existing structure. And among those changes, they said we would need to gut the entire interior, re-roof the whole structure, and demolish and replace the whole rear entrance, all building systems, and remove and replace all windows as well. And their conclusion was that less than 50% of the existing physical building would remain after that work. They characterized it as partial salvage. Yes, we did have that third-party group look at the condition of the building and its potential for adaptive reuse to multifamily.
Okay, so just to be clear, what you had done was looking at the repurposing or upgrading of the building, but nothing that says explicitly, like, this structure is about to fall down. I just want to make sure that's clear, right? You looked at it from the perspective of what can we do with this existing building, not that this building is deteriorated to the point that nothing can be done.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right, thanks a lot.
Is that it, Commissioner Shepard? Okay. Okay, I don't see any further raised hands, so I'm going to ask a couple more questions. So you have as your transportation demand management that you will be charging separately for parking. And I want to make sure that that covers the whole development. So that's for the townhomes also, that those would be two separate charges and that somebody wouldn't be required to pay for parking in the townhome if they don't want to have parking. Matt?
Thank you. So the parking in the townhomes is configured slightly differently than the other two multifamily buildings. The parking in the townhomes actually have spaces within their structure. So if one were to rent one of the townhomes, they would have parking within their structure.
Okay. Then I'm wondering why you only have 5 3-bedroom units, since this is such a great place for families. Did you consider having more than just 5 3-bedroom units? Matt?
I'd be glad to speak to that. We did several market studies looking at all of the other multifamily properties and townhome properties in Madison and slightly outside of Madison as well, to try to ascertain market demand for these units. And there are significantly, the fact of the matter is there are significantly fewer comparable properties with large 3-bedroom units for rent compared to the properties that exist for 1 and 2-bedroom units. So it's really one of those things where we gather as much information as we can, and we're able to support the business plan and demonstrate clear demand for certain units. And initially, we did not have 3-bedroom units baked into the plan because we didn't feel there was ample support for it in the existing properties around Madison and the surrounding area that we studied. But we did hear loud and clear from the neighborhood that they would like to see some 3-bedroom units. So we did bake some of those into the townhome plans.
Okay, thank you. And then my final question, I think, is the Allison tree report talks about the sugar maples along Sherman as being very desirable, and that they strongly recommended the preservation of those and advised on how to protect those. Are you planning to preserve those trees and protect them as advised in the Allison tree report? Matt, is that you or somebody else? Darren?
Yeah, this is Darren, and I'm not sure. I mean, we're all capable of answering this one, which is yes, we absolutely are maintaining those two sugar maples. So
Okay, very good. Any further questions of any of the registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I believe the 30-foot landscape buffer, which is, there's a lot of detail about that in the staff report and the conditions. I just want to verify that indeed will be an easement that's recorded and will restrict any development in that area for the period of the easement, because that buffer is certainly important for a number of items, including the proximity to the historic park.
Oh, there we go. I've just clicked too many buttons there. Sorry about that. Yes, that is our understanding that for at least a period of 20 years, that 30-foot area would be preserved under the terms of an easement that I believe is yet to be completely negotiated between the City and Parks Division and the development team.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have right now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to ask this similar question here about transit-oriented development and pedestrian walkability, bicycle. I've heard from some of the people that the bus service on Sherman is actually slated to be reduced. I assume that this is part of transit-oriented development because of the line on East Washington and First Street. It's a very roundabout walk to get from this development to First Street. And it was almost seemed to be inviting. I mean, the road that's in this development dead ends, but it's exactly adjacent to what I assume is a private road as part of Yahara, I'm not sure, Yahara Landing Apartments. It feels to me that the people who do want to use transit are going to be strongly tempted to cut through this other property. The situation for bikes is almost worse because, in my experience, a bicycle route is about as good as its least safe place, and that would be this section of Sherman Avenue that doesn't have bike lanes, has very little width to it, and yet there's no way to get by bike from this property onto the bike path network without negotiating that or cutting through the other development. What is in our toolbox to obtain an easement or some kind of passage through, and again, I forgot the name of that development to the east of this, to get people by bike or pedestrians over to our transit network?
It looks like Heather wants to address that. Heather?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm the best to address the question that you landed with, but I just want to provide some context. I'm just going to share the Metro Transit Network redesign map right in the vicinity of this project, just for the benefit of the commission, just for some context, really. So here's Tenney Park, if you can see my cursor moving. So right on Sherman Avenue, there will be peak time service with the Route 28 that circulates on Sherman, Fordham, and then heads to downtown. That's the peak route. So folks who are using transit during peak times will have a great peak route right in front of or on the northern Sherman side of the site. And then others will, I'm going to zoom into this location here. Others would likely take either the multi-use path over to Johnson Street to catch a bus toward downtown or away from downtown. Or if they walk or wheel 3/4 of a mile, then they would get to the bus rapid transit system. So I think the most convenient transit will probably be the peak route right on Sherman, serving this site. But for folks who need, off-peak service or service to other areas, the bus rapid transit and around-the-clock transit along Johnson and Quorum would be available too. So I wanted to share that just as some context. I think the cut-through movement that you're mentioning is real. I mean, it's basically folks are going to perhaps prefer to walk through this property here to Fordham Avenue in order to catch those Johnson Street buses. And how might we work to help facilitate an easement in that area? It's nothing that the city can force. We're trying to make sure that what they're doing on their site that they control is consistent with adopted plans, which call for that cross street, that east-west cross street between Sherman and Fordham. I think it would be fantastic if they could secure a private easement, through both sites and allow for more pedestrian circulation in the shorter term. But in the long term, really seeing that street go through is going to involve a decision at the initiative of that property owner to the east. And I think Sean Malloy is here from traffic engineering, and Tim might have more to say on that specific question that you got to. But I thought just providing that context, there are several transit choices, different distances from the site, as well as, of course, the regional bike path network accessed through Tenney Park.
Tim or Sean, do you have things to add?
I guess I'd just like to add that, we did have a condition in there that development worked with us to provide a path connection from that new street to the end of that new street south to the Parks parcel. So I guess that pontoon launch area. Those that may not know, there's a well-used dirt path, goat trail that goes behind the boat launch and connects to Johnson. It's pretty well used. I actually walked it a couple months ago. So, I do anticipate that will be used quite a bit. We're not able to improve that path. Unfortunately, it's too close to the river and there's watershed issues. But that is a route that I think people take that goes through the Parks parcel rather than the private property. So I think that will help. It's not ideal, but at least it's an option. And then going to Sherman Avenue, we do have bike lanes from Marston to this site. So I guess bikes leaving the site, they'll be able to use the bike lanes to get to Thornton Avenue, and they'll be able to get you to either Johnson, Dayton, or I think all the way over to Jennifer. So that kind of gets you into the bike network as an option, or you can continue down Sherman. It's pretty low stress bike route. We have a couple speed humps and some traffic calming on Sherman west of Marston. So to get to Gorham, where we have bike lanes. So from the bike access point of getting downtown, in my opinion, it's pretty decent.
Thank you. Actually, I hadn't seen the bike lanes on the bridge over Yahara on Sherman Avenue. I thought maybe that was absent bike lanes in that area. So that helps a lot. And Heather, I understand that the city could not require an easement. Has the city ever taken a proactive initiative to acquire that type of a pedestrian easement through a property? If that, I think the goat path is out of the question, and I do think trespass is not out of the question. I mean, there's 300, residents here who are probably not going to take the long way around if they can just simply walk through a paved area on the adjacent property. I'm a little concerned with that. Are you aware of any conditions where the city has actually taken the effort to obtain such an easement based on a voluntary agreement from the property owner, not condemnation, of course?
Heather, any?
It looks like Tim has a response to that.
Oh, okay.
Well, I appreciate Commissioner Fernandez adding at the end the not condemnation part, because that was that's very important, that we cannot do that. But I can't recall an issue where we have acquired that. I mean, if we were going to do something like that, as you probably well know from your past life with our fair city, that we would probably be looking at a broader project for that, because it's not just obtaining the right. And we'll note for the record, and everybody watching around TV land and on the interwebs, that we are not condoning trespassing, but that we would probably be talking about not just acquiring an easement, but probably programming how that path would get there. One of the things that we have to do with the street is come up with as much of a plan as we can for how we're going to get the street from where it's going to end up to Fordham Avenue. So where it's going to end up with this project, and then that future phase, likely to be a city project that would complete the street over to Fordham. We would have to do something similar for a path, because we'd have to make sure that it's accessible, probably have to be a hard surface. And I think it's still too soon to say that we, really probably don't want to put a path where we probably want a street to go. And we've had some unfortunate luck with that in recent years. And I think unless we came to a determination that there's no way the street can go through there, or it can go through there, but not for a cost that's really feasible, but maybe a bike path would work, multi-purpose path, as at least an opportunity to get the pedestrians and bicycles from where this street is going to end to Fordham Avenue, that there would be that as a default. But that, I don't believe, is the position we would want to start with.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
Okay. Alder Heck.
Thank you. Commissioner Fernandez asked many excellent questions beyond what I was even thinking about, so thank you, but on the same topics. I did just have one clarifying question. I want to understand the status of that imaginary street extension. There's no officially mapped street at this time. It's just an idea from what and perhaps in planning documents, but not mapped. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And in sort of to clarify the record, I would say that the Emerson East Deacon Park Yahara neighborhood plan was approved before the advent or recent popularity of official mapping. There's nothing that would prevent the city from adding the remainder of the street to the official map it may ultimately be a good interim first step. We are aiming this new street at the corridor that we feel it is likeliest to go through. But there's actually 5 parcels that it would traverse in part. It's a private drive that has parking on it that provides parking for the dwelling units on those parcels to the east. And I mean, obviously, there's an engagement process when you talk about, potentially adding public streets where there's currently private traffic. There's issues about how it's going to be paid for. This is maybe not a street that the folks on the adjacent parcels are clamoring for. That's not to say that, the idea that they wouldn't maybe come around to it, but that also is different than, sign us up for being assessed for it. And so there's a lot of things that we would have to sort through to get to really any improvement from where this, first phase of the street will end to Fordham Avenue. And I mean, again, I want to emphasize once again that I believe that would be the case if it were just a multi-purpose path, if that were the only outcome that was ultimately achievable. And so we'd have to officially map potentially. We definitely have to budget. There's an acquisition involved, regardless of whether it's a path or a full street. Budgeting, construction. I mean, we're talking about a multi-step, multi-phase project that we would be, pursuing to get the street completed.
Thank you, Tim.
Just one follow-up question. Thanks. So the street section that's included in this development proposal, this a public street, was also not officially mapped. It was a concept and planning documents that planning encouraged the developer to include, as I understand it. And the cost of that street will be borne primarily by the developer, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Those were my questions.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any further questions of staff? Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, when the council placed the landmark of this building on file, was there any discussion about that, or did they just say, "Well, the application for a building permit has been filed, and therefore we can't consider this because the Plan Commission has to review it"? Could the alders respond to my question? Thank you.
So, Alder
Heck.
If it's appropriate, I don't remember the entire discussion. I remember what I said about reading the standards of approval for the landmarks nomination that we were considering, and pointing out where I felt there was subjectivity involved in choosing whether or not something met the standards of approval. And I mentioned that I thought that that those particular items that were subjective I felt that it was fine to say that it did not meet those standards of approval. I don't have the language right in front of me. Yeah.
Okay.
There were other comments too, but I actually don't remember exactly what those were. Maybe Alder Paulson does.
Looks like Alder Paulson wants to weigh in there. Alder?
I was going to say that we had a robust public testimony. We had a long discussion with staff. There was not actually a lot of debate on the item itself. So I don't know that I would go as far as to say that the council reached any particular conclusions as to why or why not anything happened. But the end result, the official thing that we did was as a body was that we placed it on file.
Okay. At least you considered it. Okay.
Thank you, Alder Paulson. Any further questions, Commissioner Cantrell?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see no other raised hands. So I would be looking for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, let's get this project at least considered. I will make a motion that the Plan Commission find that the demolition permit standards have been met.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Cantrell?
I do think that they have met the standards, and I know that this is a tough one. In looking at the standards, relocating this building is just it really is not capable of being done. I think that really refers more to a single family house, a small structure that actually could be moved. And standard 6, where we consider whether the condition of the building or buildings proposed for demolition or removal, we shall consider that. I think that the applicant did consider that, and they hired a firm to look at that for an adaptive reuse, and that would be actually for the purpose of residential in this case. And it was determined that it didn't fit for the adaptive reuse. So basically the demolition was basically the option that was brought forward here. And the Plan Commission has reviewed many buildings that are not fire traps, or they don't have huge building code issues, but they are functionally obsolete. And I think what this building is that in this case for residential purposes. And I think that the council considered whether this is a landmark, and they've basically put it on file. So I think that in this case, it does meet the demolition standards, and that's why I'm recommending it be approved.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I support this as well. I'll just point out that I think the is it a landmark and does it have historic significance are different questions, and were addressed slightly different. The council didn't take into account wasn't supposed to take into account the pending application and its consideration of the landmark status. But before us, the Landmark Commission has also told us that they believe that this building is historically significant, or that there is historic. I should go back and get the language exact from that it has historic value based on cultural and historic significance. And they cited two reasons: one, the credit union, and then one, the association with Harry Truman. And I think on balance, I do believe that it had historic significance with the credit union. I think it was pretty well documented that this was created for that. I think on the whole that Madison is okay. Across the street, we have Philmay Park also here to be part of that reminder of the credit union, the credit union movement and its relation to Madison, and then potentially a marker on site. And I guess I did have considered and am not persuaded by the Landmarks Commission's position on President Truman. While he was here and he gave a speech, I think the arrow causation is maybe not correct. And I think he gave a speech on credit unions, incorporated into that because he happened to be here to give a speech about credit unions, and that's how he worked it into his 4-point plan. If he had been somewhere else, it would have been something else in support of the 4-point plan. So I am very comfortable moving forward with the demolition permits, having considered the recommendation from the Landmarks Commission.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Fernandez.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say initially that I pretty much agree with everything that Commissioner Cantrell and Alder Paulson said. But in my mind, this is kind of a classic case where something may be of considerable historic value to historians, but not to the public. So I agree that there's no real potential for moving this, probably no potential for adaptive reuse of the building. And there's no architectural significance, which means it's not in the hearts and minds of the community that this is a beautiful building that must be preserved. But sometimes things have value to professional historians, those who want to document some part of the history, where it doesn't have a lot of value to non-professionals and the public in general. And I think that value can be largely preserved with an historical documentation by a professional historian to the standards of the National Historic Society. I've been involved in quite a few cases where that was done for buildings. It doesn't seem exceedingly burdensome to me, and it does feel like an appropriate middle ground. So I'm going to offer that as a resolution, that the demolition be conditioned on obtaining a professional documentation of the historical site to the standards of the State Historical Society.
So you're offering that as an amendment to the motion?
I am offering an amendment.
Is there a second to that amendment? Is there a second to that? Seconded by Commissioner Cantrell. Okay. Any input before we come to a vote on that? Alder Heck.
Thanks. I just want to clarify what the amendment is. I heard both national historical standards and state historical standards, so I want to make sure we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, forgive me. I would say State Historical Society standards.
Thanks.
Or we would sometimes say SHPO, but that's, State Historical Society.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak?
I think that's a good amendment. I think that we've discussed that, and I think we've also required that on other projects in the past.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Motion passes unanimously. Now we are on the main motion. Any further comments on that before we come to a vote? See, Commissioner Cantrell. Oops. Okay.
Just one other point. In this case, we have to kind of balance historic preservation with the needs of the city and housing and our plans. And I think that on that balance, I think that the housing and consistency with the neighborhood plan in this case is quite apparent. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Solheim.
He stole the words from my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. I just wanted to add in, make sure it was clear that the statement of purpose for the demolition section does refer to demolition for purposes of implementing approved plans. And I do believe, the neighborhood plan did give several scenarios for this site, which is one of the reasons I'll be supporting this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, seeing no other raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. The next item on which we need a motion is the zoning change of the property. Is there a motion? Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, I will move that the Plan Commission forward the zoning of 1601 to 1617 Sherman Avenue to the City Council, zoning it from SE suburban employment to traditional residential urban 2 district be approved.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak to your motion?
Just briefly, I think that this is consistent with the comprehensive plan designation for this site.
Any other input or comments before we come to a vote? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. The next is agenda item 8 on the conditional use. Looking for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
I will recommend that the Plan Commission find the conditional use permit for 1601 to 1617 Sherman Avenue for the proposed multiple family complex be approved.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Cantrell?
Many speakers talked tonight about the site's appropriateness for multiple family housing. It's a perfect site for that. It's adjoining a park. It's near bike trails. It's on a bus line, even though the bus line is probably not as vigorous as we would hope to have. But bus lines change, and I think that in the future this one might be brought back. It's near our future public market, so actually people could bike and walk to the public market. We certainly need housing, and I think that this again provides a perfect spot for it. It provides a 30-foot wide buffer strip between the park and this project. I think that's excellent, and that is restricted so that the Parks Department has really pretty much ownership rights to it. So that will be protected. It's protecting some of the trees on the property. And it's, again, I think it's consistent with our neighborhood plan, which provides for medium density housing in this area. So that's why I'm recommending it be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that this motion includes all conditions, including the condition that would go back to UDC for final approval.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Solheim. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a brief remark concerning a lot of the public input that we had on this item. I'll be supporting this motion, but we heard a lot about affordable housing in a lot of the comments and disappointments that this didn't include any affordable housing. And I just wanted to remind folks that the city cannot require affordable housing or even dictate rent levels unless we have some skin in the game. For instance, we've provided affordable housing funds, or it's on city land, or we're using TIF money, et cetera. So as much as we'd all like this to be 100% affordable housing, the state courts have not allowed cities in Madison to dictate those things in private developments as much as we'd like to. Thank you.
Thank you for that statement. Important to say. Okay, seeing no further raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Okay, motion passes unanimously. And the final motion we need is for agenda item 9 on the certified survey map. Commissioner Cantrell.
I'll recommend that the certified survey map be forwarded to the City Council with a recommendation of approval.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. Did you wish to speak to your motion, Commissioner Cantrell?
No.
Commissioner Shepard.
Again, subject to conditions from reviewing agencies.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, any discussion? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, motion passes unanimously. That's an interesting project and some good discussion and engagement. So thank you all. Next, any business by members? Seeing none, we will go to the Secretary's report.
Thank you, Chair Zellers. Looking back at the March 7th council meeting, the council had a lot of actions related to Plan Commission recommendations, and all were made according to what the Plan Commission had recommended. So the family definition change did pass at the council, as did the downtown height changes for affordable housing. And also all of the implementation items that had to do with the Odana area plan. So the official mapping and proactive rezonings also passed at that March 7th council meeting. That represents a lot of work from this body. Looking forward to April 10th, I'll just mention a couple of the major projects. One is on the 400 block of State Street, right next to Lisa Link Peace Park, for a new 26-unit apartment building. And then at the end of our list there on April 10th, one of the new residential or mixed-use buildings actually out in the American Center at 4846 East Park Boulevard, a conditional use for a 5-story mixed-use building. And then looking forward to April 24th, more on East Park Boulevard, 200 apartments in 2 new 4-story buildings. And then a couple of changes to the Acacia Ridge replat. This is basically expanding or tweaking the lot configurations within that long approved plat. So that's what we have ahead of us thus far. We could get some additional submittals for April 24th. We as planning staff may have a few new items that we add to that April 24th date, including a look for the Plan Commission at our ideas for the interim comprehensive plan update, a minor update to the comprehensive plan that will basically refresh the future land use map based on all of the adopted sub-area plans between 2018 and today, and offer an opportunity for a few other changes to that generalized future land use map as well. So we may take an opportunity to introduce that effort to the Plan Commission on the 24th as well. That's where I'll leave it for this evening. Thank you all so much.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Heather. And we do have something from Commissioner Fernandez.
Well, again, I don't see March 27th on here at all. I'm just trying to kind of confirm what's going on there. Do we have the dates wrong, or are we just planning on a very short meeting on the 24th?
On the 27th. No, you're absolutely right. There is a meeting of the 27th. Tim just came back to.
That's on me. Yes, we have a meeting on the 27th. You should definitely be there. And it will feature a daycare center at 652 Burnt Sienna Drive, corner of Old Sauk Road, a redevelopment at the corner of Williamson and Blount Street, 654 Willie Street, and a couple of demolitions on Gilson Street, 1521 and 1525, and demolition in a recently acquired parkland 4825 North Sherman. I somehow magically wished that our wintry March would go away, and I forgot about the 27th. And again, I do apologize for that. But yes, be here on the 27th. You especially, Mr. Fernandez. So I apologize again.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Fernandez, for being on top of that. I appreciate it. Okay. So we need a motion then to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Cantrell, seconded by Commissioner Solheim. And I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hand, the motion passes unanimously. I will see you all on March 27th. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.